Chapter 1454. The master of the Brahma sect never expected that he would be at a disadvantage in such an unexpected situation. Even though he could learn the simplest physical combat technique with a single glance, he was not as experienced as Chu Xiu, who had fought his way up from the bottom. The number of times the master of the Brahma sect was killed increased, and the balance of their Yuan spirit power had begun to tilt. If this continued, his Yuan spirit would be exhausted to death by Chu Xiu sooner or later. The clash of Yuan spirit power was simple and unadorned. In this Yuan spirit space, both sides were competing with their Yuan spirit power. The only thing they could compete with was their Yuan spirit power. Therefore, the moment Chu Xiu charged at him, the master of the Brahma sect suddenly gave up on fighting him. Instead, he ignited his Yuan spirit flame and pulled Chu Xiu into it, binding him tightly. Mutual destruction. Most experts in the 9 heavens treasured their lives, but ever since heavenly souls appeared, the master of the Brahma sect had no intention of leaving this place alive. Although the expert from 500 years ago had said that he would not interfere in a fair fight with Chu Xiu, who knew if the master of the Brahma sect would seek revenge in the future? But if he killed his successor, who knew if the master of the Brahma sect would seek revenge in the future? From the moment the master of the Brahma sect attacked, he was already prepared to die. Even if it meant mutual destruction, he was determined to kill Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu's eyes also revealed a cold glint. He also decisively began to ignite his Yuan spirit. 2 rays of golden Yuan spirit light burned fiercely, and their speed increased by 30%. The master of the Brahma sect said coldly, "Chu Xiu, even if you tried your best to destroy my Brahma sect, you will still die today. You've done things so ruthlessly. Have you ever thought about this day?" Chu Xiu said calmly, "Of course I have, but the outcome might be different from what you think. The true peak of the 9 heavens martial immortal doesn't lie in where you are the strongest, but in where you are the weakest. For so many years, you have been enemies with the world exalt, but you are inferior to the world exalt, much less the Tao exalt, and even Meng Xinghe. Because they don't have any obvious weaknesses, but you do." Before the sect leader could react, the golden light from Chu Xiu's burning nascent divinity turned into 2 extreme tearing forces, forcibly tearing the sect leader's nascent divinity apart. The souls of normal people were one. Unless one's own soul was extremely powerful, it was impossible to tear apart another person's soul. But at this moment, the sect master of Brahma sect let out a miserable howl. His Yuan spirit had actually been split into 2 by this power. One side was as black as ink, and it carried a sinister and evil power, while the other side was still in the form of a golden soul. How could Chu Xiu not be prepared when facing the true powerhouses of the 9 heavens? Ever since Chu Xiu annihilated the Brahmin sect and obtained their information, he had been preparing for this battle. Chu Xiu had 2 backup plans. One was the heavenly soul, and the other was himself. Chu Xiu had never been used to putting his life in the hands of others, even if the person was a heavenly soul. Therefore, after destroying the Sanskrit sect, Chu Xiu had found all the information about the sect leader of Brahma sect, and finally found a weakness of the sect leader. The sect leader of Brahma sect was good and evil. It seemed that there was something wrong with his mind, but in fact, this was a side effect of practicing a secret method. This secret method allowed the sect leader of Brahma sect to perfectly control the power of the Brahma temple and the Shiva temple, and integrate the power of yin and yang. This kind of practice was somewhat similar to that of Chu Xiu, but Chu Xiu only controlled the power of yin and yang, while the sect leader of Brahma sect wanted to completely integrate these 2 powers into his body, and even into his nascent divinity. Yin and yang opposed each other, and then combined them with the chaotic power of Vishnu temple, but the sect leader of Brahma sect found that when he combined the power of yin and yang with the power of Vishnu temple, this power would be weakened. Therefore, in order to maintain this power, he had to give up the power of Vishnu temple. This caused him to be more and more affected by the opposing power of yin and yang, and even his nascent divinity began to split. Today's battle seemed very fierce, but in fact, every step was under Chu Xiu's control, and it was exactly as he had expected. The two nascent divinities of yin and yang were completely separated. When they combined, they could still compete with Chu Xiu, but now that they were separated, they were completely extinguished by the hot nascent divinity fire. In the nascent divinity space, Chu Xiu's nascent divinity was much smaller than before, and even the golden light was much dimmer. In the whole space, there were only two balls of light, one black and one white, both formed by the purest power of nascent divinity. Chu Xiu did not hesitate to swallow it into his nascent divinity, and instantly, the power of yin and yang spread all over his nascent divinity. That power even almost made Chu Xiu's nascent divinity explode, but he used the power of origin to suppress it. It was precisely because of these two powers that the Sanskrit sect's hierarch had suffered from schizophrenia. However, Chu Xiu wasn't afraid. Although he walked the same path as the sect leader of Brahma sect, in fact, the way they walked was completely different. With the power of yin and yang in his body, anything related to the power of yin and yang, Chu Xiu was confident that he could suppress it. At this time, in the outside world, everyone was waiting to see the result. They did not expect that the battle between Chu Xiu and the sect leader of Brahma sect would be so fierce, so dangerous, directly destroyed the body, and ended with the battle of the nascent divinity. To be able to do this at the eighth heaven, Chu Xiu's strength was at least unprecedented, if not unparalleled in the future. After a quarter of an hour, Chu Xiu's body swayed, and blood splattered all over his body. His aura was already extremely weak. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. From now on, there will be no Brahma sect in this world. The Tao Lord was stunned, and finally let out a long sigh. The sect leader of Brahma sect was dead. In this era, other than those ninth heaven experts who had died of old age, the sect leader of Brahma sect was the first to die a violent death. Perhaps, their era was coming to an end. The World Lord also let out a long sigh, put his palms together, and chanted the name of Buddha. The heavenly Luo treasure temple and Brahma sect had been fighting for many years. Perhaps, since the beginning of the existence of the two sects, they had always been fighting, seeing each other as heretics, and wanted to completely eradicate them. In the end, the Brahma sect was destroyed, and the sect leader of Brahma sect was dead. This made the World Lord feel that the world was unpredictable. Only Meng Xinghe's eyes flickered, but he didn't say anything. Tian Hun waved his hand and said, "The battle is over. In a life and death situation, all grudges are resolved. What are you still waiting for? Do you still want to continue fighting?" The Tao Lord shook his head and said, "There are only a few supreme experts in the ninth heaven in the entire upper and lower realms. However, the passage to the other world in the South Sea has been opened. The experts from the other world have already arrived and are expanding the entrance of the passage. So, Senior, are you really not considering joining forces with us to reseal that world?" Tian Hun said lightly, "I have my own considerations on this matter. When the time comes, I will take the initiative to inform you." Right now, Chu Xiu was already seriously injured, and his strength hadn't recovered. Even if he wanted to seal it, he was powerless. The Tao Lord and the other two shook their heads and turned to leave. After everyone left, Tian Hun looked at Chu Xiu and said with a smile, "How does it feel to kill a ninth heaven expert? Although you haven't really reached the peak, you already have the qualifications to go to the peak." Chu Xiu let out a long breath and said, "It's not good. If I knew that you weren't at the peak, what's the point of letting you out?" Tian Hun raised his eyebrows and said, "Don't be so snobbish. The netherworld heaven has already descended. If you don't let me out, are you going to rely on yourself to resist the life spirit?" At this time, Wei Shuya and the others had already rushed over. However, they looked conflicted because they didn't know how to address Tian Hun and Chu Xiu. Especially Lu Jianghe. Both of them were sect masters. Who should he address as sect master? Tian Hun waved his hand and said, "Just call me Lord Dugu." "Have you told them about us?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "No, but since the netherworld heaven has descended, I can tell them now. They are all my confidants and absolutely trustworthy people. By the time Chu Xiu told everyone about the separation of the three souls, everyone was dumbfounded. Some of them even couldn't react. Lu Jianghu was stunned and said, "So, you are all sect masters? Even the one in the netherworld heaven is a sect master?" Tianhun nodded and said, "You can understand it that way. Of course, you can also understand that we are not sect masters. If the life spirit in the netherworld heaven devours all of us, he will become the real Dugu Weiwei. So, little Lu, what will you choose now? They are loyal to the earth soul Chu Xiu. What about you? The life spirit has descended. Are you going to betray us?" Tianhun looked at Lu Jianghe with a faint smile and a mocking look on his face. Lu Jianghe hurriedly shook his head and said, "How can I, Lu Jianghe, be such a person? Who doesn't know that I, Lu Jianghe, am loyal and righteous?" Since 500 years had passed, the karma of the past had long since dissipated. In this life, it was Cult Master Chu who released me and allowed me to become a martial immortal. Whether he is the earth soul of Patriarch Dugu or not, I am loyal to him. Lu Jianghe's words were righteous. Even if no one believed him, no one would believe that he would betray them. Lu Jianghe still had this bottom line. Tianhun nodded and said, "Go and heal your injuries first. Your injuries are too serious. I have a few secret techniques that can help you recover quickly. At the same time, I need to recover my strength." Chu Xiu and Tianhun went into seclusion in a secret room. One was recuperating, while the other was preparing to recover his strength. However, according to Tianhun, it was very difficult for him to recover the realm of Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago. At most, he could recover 80% of Dugu Weiwei's peak. He had all of Dugu Weiwei's memories from 500 years ago. It was not a problem for him to recover his martial arts. However, he was only a heavenly soul and was incomplete. Thus, he could not be exactly the same as Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago. If he had time, he could think of a way to temporarily recover his primordial spirit. However, it was a pity that the netherworld heaven had descended. They did not have much time. Chapter 1455. In the Kunlun Devil Cult's seclusion chamber, Chu Xiu spent a whole month recovering from the injuries he had sustained during the fierce battle with the Brahmin cult leader. Although he had refined the yin and yang power in the Brahmin cult leader's primordial spirit, which had greatly improved the strength of his primordial spirit, he was still at the peak of the 8th heaven. There were no signs of him breaking through to the 9th heaven. It was not easy to enter the 9th heaven. It was not enough to simply increase the primordial spirit's power. Chu Xiu looked at the heavenly soul opposite him. He had already come out from his closed-door cultivation. "Your power has recovered?" Tianhun shook his head and said, "Not yet. After being sealed for 500 years, my body is a little weak. I can't bear too much power on a large scale." Chu Xiu said in a low voice, "The passage that Lord Taishian mentioned should be the passage from netherworld heaven to the lower world, but the life spirit still hasn't come. Does he have other plans? It's useless to think so much now. Why don't we go and see for ourselves?" Tianhun said. Chu Xiu nodded and went straight to the South Sea with Tianhun. They weren't courting death, but they had the confidence to do so. Chu Xiu could now fight against the 9th heaven at the peak of the 8th heaven. After a month, Tianhuan's strength was comparable to the 9th heaven, although he had not completely recovered. At the very least, it would not be a problem for him to deal with Lord Taishian and the others. Since Lord Taishian could return safely, they would definitely be fine. Since the life spirit had not come, it proved that he was still in netherworld heaven. Dugu Weiwei's 3 souls were separated. Tianhun and Chu Xiu had different personalities. The life spirit was probably more like Dugu Weiwei. It should be said that he was Dugu Weiwei. Based on Dugu Weiwei's personality, he would definitely not waste time. If he could get out of Netherworld Heaven, he would definitely come to devour Chu Xiu and Tianhun. Since the life spirit had not appeared, it proved that he might still be in Netherworld Heaven and could not appear. As soon as he stepped into the South China Sea, Chu Xiu's expression changed slightly. "What's wrong?" Tianhun asked. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "I've been to the South Sea before." At that time, although the heaven-earth essence energy in the South Sea was violent and chaotic, not suitable for martial artists to cultivate, the quality of the essence energy was still very rich. But now, the essence energy level of the entire South Sea has dropped significantly. This is clearly not right. The Daoist Yuan Qi poured into the lower realm, causing the Yuan Qi level of the entire lower realm to rise to another level. There was no reason that only the South Sea's essence Qi level would be so low. Chu Xiu and Tianhun followed the route of Dao Master and the others to the hinterland of the South Sea. When they saw the place, Chu Xiu wanted to curse. Dao Master said that this was just a passageway. At this moment, what appeared in front of Chu Xiu was simply a huge palace complex. The small island that Dao Master and the others had come to had disappeared. In its place was a group of palaces formed by huge white bone palaces. These white bone palaces were not used for living. They were engraved with formations and finally formed a very shocking formation. The center of the formation was the passageway that connected the two worlds. It was that passageway that was continuously absorbing the heaven-earth essence energy of the South Sea into Netherworld Heaven. At that moment, there were 4 people guarding the passageway. When Chu Xiu saw them, he said in a deep voice, "Are they the 4 great demon lords under the Kunlun devil cult?" A complicated look flashed in Tianhuan's eyes. "That's them. According to what you said, the previous celestial master of the celestial master mansion could be raised to the 5th or 6th heaven. It's not impossible for the 4 great demon lords to be raised to the 9th heaven. Only they can defeat Dao Master and the others." Chu Xiu frowned and said, "What is Life Soul trying to do?" Previously, Life Soul had already sent people to invade the dragon veins of the 3 countries and absorb their power into Netherworld Heaven. Now, he has set up such a huge formation here to absorb the power of the entire South Sea. What is he trying to do? Tianhun touched his chin and said, "It might be a problem with Netherworld Heaven itself." About the existence of Netherworld Heaven, there were very few memories left by Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago. After the 3 souls had separated, Life Soul had entered Netherworld Heaven and understood everything about it. In fact, among the 5 heaven realms, Upper Mortal Heaven, Lower Mortal Heaven, and Daoist Heaven were normal worlds. Longevity Heaven was too mysterious. As for Netherworld Heaven, in Dugu Weiwei's memory, it seemed to be a world with some flaws, but no one knew exactly where the flaws were. Now that Life Soul has sent people to the lower realm to absorb its power, I'm afraid he wants to borrow its power to make up for the flaws in Netherworld Heaven. Chu Xiu pondered for a moment before saying, "How confident are we in dealing with these people with just you and me?" Tianhun glanced at Chu Xiu and said with a faint smile, "I've recovered some of my power. Although I can't reach my peak state 500 years ago, it's not a problem to deal with 1 or 2 of them. But don't think that you can really look down on the experts of the 9th heaven just because you killed the master of Fan Cult. Any one of these 4 people is more difficult to deal with than the master of Fan Cult. Besides, do you think this is all the power of Netherworld Heaven? You're thinking too simply. 500 years ago, the Kunlun devil cult was indeed full of talents. Even Lu Jianghu, the unreliable guy, could soar all the way to the martial immortal realm if he was given a chance. However, there are also many experts in other sects, such as Sword Saint Gu Qingsheng and Sword Emperor Shen Kangwu. These people are not easy to deal with. They haven't shown up yet, but do you think the Life Soul won't increase their power to the 9th heaven? Netherworld Heaven came so quickly that it came before Chu Xiu was ready. This made Chu Xiu a little unprepared. The good news was that Chu Xiu could at least be sure that Netherworld Heaven had come, but the Life Soul didn't seem to come out for a while. The bad news was that although Chu Xiu had killed the master of Fan cult and could stand at the top of the upper and lower worlds, he was basically vulnerable to the life soul. It was even difficult to deal with its subordinates. Let's go. Although time is tight, there are still some opportunities to prepare. We can consider joining forces with the Tao Lord. With our current strength, we have to drag them along with us if we want to go against the entire world. The Kunlun demon sect alone won't be able to go against the entire Yellow Springs heaven. But don't tell them about the separation of the three souls until the last moment. Chu Xiu nodded. Of course, he knew this. The Lord and the others were not on his side. Naturally, there was no need to tell them about this. Even though they had discovered the purpose of the life soul, heavenly soul, and Chu Xiu couldn't do anything to it for the time being. They could only retreat first. However, after returning to the Kunlun devil cult, Wei Shuya said that Meng Xinghe had been waiting for Chu Xiu at the Kunlun devil cult for a few days. Meng Xinghe suddenly came to find him, which made Chu Xiu slightly curious. Meng Xinghe should be hiding from him now. Because of Yi Weikong's death, there was a great hatred between Chu Xiu and Meng Xinghe. Previously, Meng Xinghe wanted to kill him, but he was stopped by the old barbarian king. Now, it was basically impossible for Meng Xinghe to touch him. Not including Heavenly Soul, even Chu Xiu was confident that he could fight Meng Xinghe. So, what was he doing here now? Do you need me to go with you? Asked Heavenly Soul. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, no need. Meng Xinghe wouldn't dare to make a move here. In the living room of the Kunlun devil cult's main hall, Chu Xiu walked out of the inner hall and raised his eyebrows slightly. I'm really surprised that Dean Meng would come to the holy cult. Meng Xinghe didn't talk nonsense with Chu Xiu. Seeing that Chu Xiu had finally appeared, Meng Xinghe said directly, Cult Master Chu, I'm here today to make a bet with you. A bet? Meng Xinghe said indifferently, besides the matter with Yi Weikong, there's actually no enmity between us. It's even to the extent that our views towards the martial Tao are shockingly identical. So, if it wasn't for the matter with Yi Weikong, we might even have become allies and friends. Now that the senior from 500 years ago has been released, no one in the world is a match for him. Even if we join forces again, it will be the same. Moreover, Cult Master Chu, you killed the Cult Master of the 9th heaven when you were at the peak of the 8th heaven. Although your realm is slightly lower, your combat power is no different from that of a 9th heaven powerhouse. In this state, it's even more impossible for me to kill you. So, Dean Meng, you want to settle the scores with me today and turn enemies into friends? Meng Xinghe shook his head and said, of course not. Yi Weikong is my good friend and my only good friend for so many years. I can't let go of his life. But recently, I've discovered something that can bring Yi Weikong back to life. Chu Xiu suddenly thought of something. He suddenly raised his head and stared at Meng Xinghe. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Meng Xinghe's mouth as he said, my Xinghe Martial Arts Academy has martial art practitioners from the royal family of Eastern Qi. Someone revealed that Cult Master Chu once killed the master of the Iron Emperor Castle in the lower domain 500 years ago in the Dragon Vein of Eastern Qi. Monk Longtu, who was in the original God Palace, was also an expert from the lower world 500 years ago. These things seem very interesting. Previously, I joined forces with Dao Master and the others to open the channel. I thought that the channel was just a door to another world that we accidentally opened. But after a period of investigation, I found out that the so-called other world is not just a normal one. It is inextricably linked to the lower world. The ones who forced us to retreat in the past were the 4 great demon lords of the Kunlun devil cult 500 years ago. At the end, we also heard an extremely terrifying sword chime. That should be sword sage Gu Qingcheng, who once injured Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago. This other world is not only connected to the lower world, but also to the Kunlun devil cult. During this time, I used my identity as the leader of Gu Zun's bloodline and looked through many ancient books left by Gu Zun's ancestors. Finally, I found some clues. If I'm not wrong, Cult Master Chu should have known about that place and the Yellow Springs Heaven, right? Chapter 1456. No one who could step into the 9th level of heaven was simple. The master of the Sanskrit cult was a madman who only had killing and hatred in his mind, but Meng Xinghe was not. There were too many scattered clues about netherworld heaven. It was normal for Meng Xinghe to be able to deduce this, so Chu Xiu was not too surprised. Therefore, Chu Xiu said indifferently, "So? Do you think that the Kunlun devil cult is the culprit of netherworld heaven's invasion?" Meng Xinghe shook his head and said, "I don't know, and that's not important. What's important is that I know I can't kill you, and I'm not the master of the Sanskrit cult, so I have to kill you at this time. I've said it before, I'm just here to make a bet with you today. After this bet, our grudges will be over, and the Galaxy Martial Academy is willing to cooperate with the Kunlun devil cult to stop netherworld heaven's invasion. What's the bet? What do you want to bet?" Meng Xinghe said in a deep voice, "Cult Master Chu, you should know about providence. In fact, you've done better than me. Although the Galaxy Martial Academy has intervened in the struggle for providence, it has gained very little. But the Kunlun devil cult has grasped most of the providence of Eastern Qi, Western Chu, and Northern Yen in the lower realm. I believe you should have sensed the strangeness of providence. But the providence you've grasped is actually a passive kind of providence. To put it bluntly, it's just icing on the cake, not providing timely help. The Galaxy Unfettered Cultivator was not good at martial arts at first, but at all kinds of secret techniques, even formations, alchemy, astrology, and other strange things. The path of providence is also the direction that the Galaxy Martial Academy successors have been studying. Finally, in my generation, it has completely matured, and there are some clues. That's why I chose to establish the Galaxy Martial Academy and intervene in the struggle for providence. Right now, I have a formation here that can condense the providence of the entire lower realm. Cult Master Chu, you've already stepped into the peak of the 8th heaven. Although you're only one step away from the 9th heaven, it's not easy to plan to cross that threshold. But as long as you have this formation, in addition to the luck that you possess, Cult Master Chu can definitely help you step into the 9th heaven. Meng Xinghe's bet did move Chu Xiu. With the descent of the netherworld heaven, it was unknown when his life soul would step into the lower realm. Now, Chu Xiu was indeed yearning for power. However, Chu Xiu now had 2 yin and yang sources in his body. It was basically impossible to rely on the yin and yang sources to increase his power. For a while, Chu Xiu did not have a good way to quickly advance to the 9th heaven. He did not even have a heavenly soul. Meng Xinghe's bet came at the right time. Then what do you want? I want the yin and yang sources in your body, Cult Master Chu. Chu Xiu frowned. What do you want the yin and yang sources for? You should know that in the entire pugilistic world, apart from me, no one can refine the yin and yang sources. Even if I give it to you, you won't be able to use it. Meng Xinghe said in a deep voice, I'm not using it. I want to use it to resurrect Yi Wei Kong. During this period of time, I've been looking for a lot of information about the netherworld heaven. Finally, I found some clues in some ancient documents. Although the Yellow Springs heaven was not connected to the former upper mortal heaven, as well as the current Daoist heaven and lower mortal heaven, some people would often enter the Yellow Springs heaven through some spatial cracks or accidents, and the things in the Yellow Springs heaven would also flow here. The netherworld heaven is actually not a complete world. Strictly speaking, it's a mirror. The world we live in is the yang side of the mirror, while the netherworld heaven is the yin side. The netherworld heaven is full of vengeful spirits and evil ghosts. However, they are ghosts evolved from pure yin and evil qi, not ghosts that people in our world become after they die. However, the world we live in is still deeply connected to the netherworld heaven. That is, any existence in the Yang world will leave a mark in the netherworld heaven. As long as this mark is found, it is possible to resurrect people in the Yang world in the netherworld heaven, and their memories will stop at the moment before their death. Cult Master Chu, the Lord of Iron Emperor Castle you met in the past, and the 4 demon lords were resurrected using the mark in the netherworld heaven. They died in the Yang world, but in the Yin world of the netherworld heaven, they are still alive, have their own bodies, and can cultivate. These people had been cultivating in the Yellow Springs heaven for 500 years using the materials in the Yellow Springs heaven. That was why they had their current strength. They were even stronger than they were 500 years ago. To find these marks, one needs to have a strong understanding of that person. I believe that with my understanding of Yi Wei Kong, I can definitely find the mark that belongs to him in the netherworld sea of the netherworld heaven. Chu Xiu was not sure whether what Meng Xinghe said was true or not, because no one except the life spirit knew what the netherworld heaven looked like. However, according to the information collected by Chu Xiu, combined with Meng Xinghe's information and deduction, most of what he said was true. This could also explain why the people who appeared were all existences from 500 years ago. Because the life spirit knew them very well, it could resurrect the mark in the netherworld heaven. If the life spirit could resurrect any existence in the netherworld heaven, then the other party could bring out the ancient demon god Lu Wenho and other experts who dominated an era. In that case, there would be no need for them to fight. However, Chu Xiu was still puzzled. Since you know that the mark in the netherworld heaven can resurrect people, why do you need the yin and yang origin? Meng Xinghe said in a deep voice, the yin and yang origin is essentially the power of life and death. The world we live in is the yang side, and the netherworld heaven is the yin side. If we want to resurrect Yi Wei Kong, we need the support of the yin and yang origin. Although I don't know how to use it for the time being, I believe that with my ability, I will be able to study the use of the yin and yang origin sooner or later. Upon hearing Meng Xinghe's words, even Chu Xiu had no choice but to admit that Meng Xinghe might not be the best among the exalted heaven's 9th heavenly layer powerhouses in terms of martial arts, but when it came to the study of various powers, Meng Xinghe's comprehension ability far surpassed the others. Meng Xinghe didn't know about the life spirit, but Chu Xiu knew. The life spirit in the netherworld heaven definitely had a pair of yin and yang origin. In that case, it was most likely that the other party had relied on the power of the yin and yang origin to resurrect all the marks. So now, the right to gamble or not to gamble is in the hands of Cult Master Chu. If Cult Master Chu doesn't want to gamble, I will immediately retreat. I won't force it. Of course, I don't have the strength to force it now. A smile appeared on Chu Xiu's face. Of course, we have to gamble. However, how will we gamble? A battle of life and death? Meng Xinghe shook his head. Of course not a battle of life and death. Although I want to resurrect Yi Wei Kong, I won't throw my life away just to resurrect him. Meng Xinghe had seen all the details of the battle between Chu Xiu and the Brahmin sect leader. Although Meng Xinghe didn't think that he would lose, he didn't dare to guarantee that he would win against Chu Xiu, who had such combat strength. If they fought to the end and both sides perished together, then it would be meaningless. Meng Xinghe took out an array disc, but upon closer inspection, the array disc looked like a chessboard. Cult Master Chu, today, we won't fight to the death. We'll just compete in martial arts. In this array disc, any martial arts can be directly manifested. Both sides don't fight with their primordial spirits or physical bodies, only the purest evolution of martial arts and the comprehension of battle formations. I'll be white, and you'll be black. Every time we go up a level, the power we can use will be stronger. We'll fight to the end and see who has more black or white pieces on this chessboard. A hint of surprise appeared in Chu Xiu's eyes. Xinghe's loose cultivator's lineage was really rich. He only needed to listen to Meng Xinghe's introduction to know that this was a treasure among treasures for the sect. It was perfect for cultivating disciples' combat experience. Alright, I'll bet with Dean Meng on this today. Meng Xinghe threw the array disc in his hand, or rather, the chessboard, horizontally between the two of them. He channeled his power into it and formed a small white person. Chu Xiu did the same. He channeled his power into it and turned it into a small black person. Under the effect of the array, the two small people could control the same power. No matter how much power Chu Xiu and Meng Xinghe channeled, the array would balance it out. From bottom to top, the initial power of these two small people was only equivalent to the third realm of the refinement body. They could only fight with the purest physical strength. Unsurprisingly, the power of these three realms was what Chu Xiu was best at. For an existence like Meng Xinghe, he was also like the fanatic religion's master. He had not experienced the stage of physical combat like the martial artists of the lower realm. Therefore, in the early stage, Meng Xinghe's small white person was killed several times in succession, and a large area on the chessboard had turned black. However, there was no panic on Meng Xinghe's face. Because as his power realm rose above the real pellet state, Chu Xiu's small black person was killed several times by Meng Xinghe, and the chessboard was instantly mixed with black and white. As the descendant of Xinghe Lu's cultivator, his talent could be said to be extremely amazing, and everything in Xinghe Lu's cultivator's lineage belonged to him. Therefore, at this stage, the various divine arts and secret techniques that Meng Xinghe could grasp far surpassed Chu Xiu. It was even to the extent that he could already sense the understanding of laws and divine abilities that belonged to martial immortals. Although Chu Xiu had all kinds of expected and unexpected opportunities along the way, and he didn't lack cultivation techniques, he was undoubtedly a bit shabby compared with Meng Xinghe at this stage. Therefore, from the realms of real pellet state to heaven and earth mysterious opening, Chu Xiu lost more than he won. After a round of fighting, most of the area on the chessboard was mixed with black and white. The next martial arts battle of the martial immortal realm was the most crucial. Chapter 1457. Excluding Chu Xiu, Meng Xinghe should be the youngest expert of the ninth heaven in the entire Daoist. Moreover, his comprehension of martial arts was very, very similar to Chu Xiu's. They were the kind of people who did not care about martial arts and did not differentiate between factions. They only pursued the pinnacle of combat power in martial arts. Therefore, the scale of the battle in the martial immortal realm was very intense. On the array chessboard, the black and white avatars were fighting fiercely with the power of various rules. Meng Xinghe's Xinghe Lu's cultivator lineage had inherited a very heterogeneous martial arts. He drew the power of starlight into his body and used the techniques of Taoism, Buddhism, and demonic lineages. Chu Xiu was very similar to Meng Xinghe in that he now had two pairs of yin and yang origin. He directly drew the ultimate power of origin in this world to fight. The black avatar was surrounded by black and white halos. He approached the white avatar step by step, tearing and wearing down the white avatar's power. Meng Xinghe frowned and was no longer as calm as before. In some aspects, Meng Xinghe was really similar to Chu Xiu. Not only in martial arts, but also in a part of their personalities. The only difference was that Chu Xiu had long been in charge of a region and the leader of a demonic cult that dominated the entire lower world. Therefore, he naturally had a domineering and flamboyant personality. Meng Xinghe had only recently started to establish the Xinghe Martial Arts Academy. Before that, he had always been low-key and reserved. In fact, Meng Xinghe was like Chu Xiu when it came to doing things. They were used to being meticulous, taking one step at a time, and rarely acting impulsively. For example, this time, Meng Xinghe did not come to fight with Chu Xiu on a whim. He had investigated the clues and news of the netherworld heaven. Therefore, he was sure that Chu Xiu would agree to it. He was the one who created the array board for the martial arts practice, so he knew the rules best. In the early stage, Chu Xiu might win with his rich experience in physical combat. However, in the middle stage, he would definitely be crushed by the powerful foundation of the Xinghe Lu's cultivator lineage. As for the later stages, Meng Xinghe was confident. 9 levels of martial immortal. Chu Xiu was, after all, only at the 8th level. At the final level of martial immortal, their understanding of the path of martial cultivation would completely rise. Thus, at a time like this, his understanding of the path of martial cultivation would completely surpass Chu Xiu's. But now, why were they in a stalemate? Meng Xinghe's eyes revealed a wisp of a resolute expression. Victory or defeat will be decided here. His small white figure was completely enveloped by starlight, and the entire chessboard was like a formation. The chessboard was crisscrossed, but it was also a formation. What Meng Xinghe did was actually against the rules. Although using Array Dao to evolve Martial Dao was one of the special skills of his Galaxy Unfettered Cultivator lineage, this array formation chessboard was originally created by him, so he was most familiar with it. It could be said that he was indirectly cheating. However, at the next moment, the power of yin and yang around Chu Xiu's body instantly spread out. The black and white markings on the chessboard seemed to have been activated in an instant. The black markings descended, and the white markings surged. The creation of yin and yang, the creation of heaven and earth. The two small figures, one black and one white, stood on the chessboard. They were like 2 points in the yin and yang fishes of Taiji. Yin and yang intertwined, and the power of creation and destruction interacted with each other. The power suddenly exploded, and the entire array formation chessboard instantly shattered. When the dust from the power ripples dispersed, Meng Xinghe's face was already blank. After a while, he revealed an extremely bitter smile and said, "I've lost." He thought that Chu Xiu was only powerful in terms of battle power, and that his cultivation was inferior to the experts in the 9th heaven. However, the truth was that Chu Xiu's comprehension of the path of martial cultivation had already surpassed his. While Meng Xinghe's vision was still on the chessboard, plotting for a piece of land, Chu Xiu's eyes were already looking beyond the chessboard, at the other world. Meng Xinghe was a very prideful person. Among the new generation of martial immortals in the celestial great overarching heaven, he was the most famous. In the recent era, he was the most outstanding character before Chu Xiu. However, at this moment, he seemed a little disheartened as he handed a scroll to Chu Xiu. "This is the method to condense the providence of the world," Meng Xinghe said in a bleak tone. "What do you plan to do next, Dean Meng?" Chu Xiu suddenly asked. Meng Xinghe smiled bitterly. "Close the Galaxy Martial Arts Academy and find a successor to continue being my primeval lord." Meng Xinghe was really disheartened. He had gathered the strength of several generations of Galaxy Unfettered Cultivator lineage to research a method to control providence, and he had finally succeeded in his generation. Moreover, in Meng Xinghe's generation, his lineage had finally reached the pinnacle of the path of martial cultivation. Coincidentally, the era of great strife had arrived, and the upper and lower realms were connected, giving Meng Xinghe an opportunity. However, the problem was that even though this era was a world of great competition, it was also an era where heroes and experts emerged in large numbers. He could not compare to Dao Master, a senior, nor could he compare to Chu Xiu, a junior. He had the method to condense providence, but he did not have the providence to add to his body. What was the use of that? He had learned the dragon-slaying art but had no place to use it. This was the saddest thing in the world. At this moment, Chu Xiu suddenly said, "Since Dean Meng already knows about the Yellow Springs Heaven, you should know that if the Yellow Springs Heaven descends, the Dao Ocean and the lower realms will not be spared. Previously, Dao Master wanted to join forces with me, but what the Kunlun Devil cult needs now is not just to join forces, but to take the initiative to command. If Dao Master Meng can help me, I can give you a promise. After defeating the Yellow Springs Heaven, I am willing to help you resurrect Yi Weikong. Of course, the premise is that we survive the invasion of the Yellow Springs Heaven, and I can also find a way to resurrect Yi Weikong." Apart from the matter of Yi Weikong, Chu Xiu and Meng Xinghe did not have much enmity. If not for this matter, the possibility of enmity between the two sides was very small, because both Chu Xiu and Meng Xinghe were very calm people. The enmity between Chu Xiu and Yi Weikong was also a battle of standpoints. At that time, Chu Xiu was on the Imperial Sky Pavilion side. With Chu Xiu's status and strength at that time, Yi Weikong had to be killed, and he could not be left alive. Moreover, it was Yi Weikong who hated him to the bone and took the initiative to fight with him. Chu Xiu could not keep him alive even if he wanted to. However, with Chu Xiu's current realm and status, Yi Weikong was really nothing. It was not that Chu Xiu had become magnanimous, but with the improvement of his strength and status, the way he looked at things had naturally changed. In his eyes, the life and death enmity in the past was like playing house now, not worth mentioning. In Chu Xiu's opinion, it was very worth it to exchange Yi Weikong, who was not worth mentioning, for the help of Meng Xinghe, a ninth heaven expert. Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Meng Xinghe suddenly raised his head, and a look of disbelief appeared in his eyes. Based on his understanding of Chu Xiu, how could Chu Xiu, who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance, make such a promise? Cult Master Chu, is what you said true? Chu Xiu asked in return, although I, Chu Xiu, don't have a good reputation in the underworld, have you ever seen me lie? Meng Xinghe let out a long sigh. When he investigated Chu Xiu previously, he thought he knew Chu Xiu very well. In the end, he only realized now that he had never really understood Chu Xiu. Without much hesitation, Meng Xinghe said in a deep voice, "Okay, I promise you, Cult Master Chu. I hope that Cult Master Chu will not let me down." Yi Weikong was Meng Xinghe's obsession. Although Yi Weikong could not be said to be more important than his life, he was, after all, his only good friend in the past. Since Chu Xiu was willing to resurrect Yi Weikong, there was naturally a possibility that they could turn enemies into friends. Of course, the most important thing was that Meng Xinghe did not want to go against Chu Xiu. He wanted to go against the person behind him. After changing their identities, Meng Xinghe no longer hid anything. He said directly, "If you want to gather the providence of the entire underworld, you must first set up formations at 3 points in the center of the providence of the underworld. The book I gave to you, Cult Master Chu, also has detailed records of formations. But forgive me for being blunt, Cult Master Chu, although the formation masters under your command are not bad, in my opinion, they are too weak. They are only passable. If you want them to set up formations, it will probably take some time to study and try it out. It might even take months. Now, I can help you set up formations, Cult Master Chu. It will only take a day to set up a formation. Then I'll have to trouble you, Dean Meng." However, Meng Xinghe suddenly said, "I can help you set up the formations, Cult Master Chu, but there is one thing I need you to take care of, Cult Master Chu." "What is it?" "The place." Meng Xinghe said solemnly, "To absorb the providence of the world, for formations must be set up. The center of Eastern Qi, Northern Yen, and West Chu, as well as the center of the entire providence formation. The Northern Yen and West Chu don't have a problem, but the Eastern Qi does. According to my investigation, the center of Eastern Qi's providence is, unfortunately, inside the Celestial Treasure Temple. Therefore, to set up a formation, it must be set up inside the temple. When the formation is activated, the force it brings will cause a certain impact to the surrounding environment. As for how to deal with the Celestial Treasure Temple, it depends on you, Cult Master Chu." Chu Xiu raised an eyebrow. "The Celestial Treasure Temple? That's fine, it's time to take care of the Celestial Treasure Temple." Meng Xinghe nodded. Since he had agreed to Chu Xiu's conditions, he would do whatever Chu Xiu said. Meng Xinghe nodded. In any case, he had agreed to Chu Xiu's conditions, so he would do whatever Chu Xiu said. However, Meng Xinghe was a little puzzled. He thought Chu Xiu was going to deal with the Celestial Treasure Temple like how he dealt with Sanskrit, but who knew that Chu Xiu would only bring him along? The two of them went straight to the Celestial Treasure Temple, and it didn't look like they were going to fight. The strangest thing was that Chu Xiu was going alone, and he didn't discuss it with the powerhouse from 500 years ago. Wasn't he the successor of that powerhouse? Why did he feel that the relationship between the two was a little strange? Chapter 1458. Inside the Heavenly Treasure Temple, when the World Venerate and the others learned that Chu Xiu and Meng Xinghe had come, even the World Venerate, who had never shown his emotions, had a puzzled look on his face. At this moment, neither of these two should have come to the Heavenly Treasure Temple. However, they had come together. This puzzled the World Venerate. He couldn't figure out their thoughts no matter how hard he tried. In the main hall of the Heavenly Treasure Temple, Meng Xinghe asked Chu Xiu, "Cult Master Chu, I heard that you had a falling out with the Heavenly Treasure Temple. Is it because of what happened to the warriors in the lower realm?" Chu Xiu said faintly, "People have no choice in the pugilistic world. There are many things that you can't decide. Maybe many people think that I, Chu Xiu, am overbearing and bloodthirsty, but they don't know that most of the disputes that happen to me are decided by my standpoint. 500 years ago, the Kunlun devil cult dominated the pugilistic world. After Dugu Weiwei went to the Daoist, the Kunlun devil cult was destroyed. However, the pugilistic world in the lower realm was afraid because of this. Because of this fear, they wanted to completely destroy the devil Dao, which led to the confrontation between the righteous and the demonic. Sometimes, whether you are righteous or demonic doesn't depend on what you do. It depends on what sect you join and what cultivation technique you choose. Under such circumstances, I can only oppose the Buddhism in the lower realm." Similarly, the Heavenly Treasure Temple came to the lower realm. They naturally want to recruit disciples from the lower realm to strengthen themselves. Although we used to be allies, the Heavenly Treasure Temple knows which side they should stand on in this situation. As he said this, a loud and clear voice was heard. "Cult Master Chu, what you said is wrong. The Heavenly Treasure Temple didn't make a choice between Cult Master Chu and the Buddhism in the lower realm. Our Heavenly Treasure Temple and the Buddhism in the lower realm came from the same source. Since we are all on the same side, what choice is there?" The World Venerate walked out of the main hall. Even though he was inside the Heavenly Treasure Temple, he still wore a big bamboo hat that covered half of his face. Chu Xiu stared at the revered one of the world. This was his first time facing the revered one of the world alone. On the way to the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple, Chu Xiu had asked Meng Xinghe what kind of existence the world exalt was. Meng Xinghe's answer was that the revered one of the world was a very stable person, even more stable than the revered Dao. Among the Daoist Ninth Heaven Supremes, Lord Taishian had already shown his elegance when he was young. He was meticulous and magnanimous. When he was still a member of the younger generation, he was already the next Lord Taishuan's successor. Even among the three Pristine's temple of that generation, there was no one who could compete with Lord Taishian. Back then, the cult master of Brahma sect was also someone whom the Brahma sect had carefully nurtured. He had never been an ordinary disciple before. He started off as the palace lord of the divine palace, then became the hall master of the Brahma heaven palace, and then became the cult master. There was no need to mention Meng Xinghe. Was there any mediocre person who could be regarded as Guzun's successor? Only the revered one had climbed up from the bottom. It was said that when the revered one of the world exalt was young, his talent was actually not outstanding. He had even been a fire-head monk in the Heavenly Treasure Temple for several years before he had the opportunity to enter the pavilion to cultivate. At this time, the revered one of the world exalt was not famous. When he was middle-aged, he was not even the first seat of the pavilion. At this time, the revered one of the world exalt chose to temporarily leave the Heavenly Treasure Temple. He sealed his cultivation and traveled to the western regions. Finally, he even went to the southern regions, the northern regions, and the eastern regions. He even went to the barbarian tribes. This trip took 100 years. When the revered one of the world exalt returned to the Heavenly Treasure Temple, the Heavenly Treasure Temple was in a fierce battle with the Sanskrit sect. The revered one of the world exalt, who was dressed like a beggar, took action and killed the Lord of Shiva temple of the Sanskrit sect in 3 moves. No one knew what the revered one of the world exalt had experienced in the past 100 years. Anyway, when he returned to the heavenly treasure temple 100 years later, he was already the next revered one of the world exalt. There was no doubt about this. After that, under the leadership of the revered one of the world exalt, the heavenly treasure temple was like his people. They were not anxious and impatient, and they were extremely calm. Every time they took a small step, they would always grow. Under his leadership, the heavenly treasure temple had unknowingly gained the upper hand against the Sanskrit sect. The revered one of the world exalt's character and way of doing things were actually very difficult to deal with. He was much more difficult to deal with than the lord of the Sanskrit sect. This was because one could not find any weakness in the other party. At this time, the revered one of the world exalt put his palms together and bowed to the 2 people. He said in a deep voice, "Cult Master Chu and Dean Meng have come from afar. Please forgive me for not going out to greet you. May I know why the 2 of you have come today?" Meng Xinghe did not say anything. He just silently retreated to the side and sat down. Although he chose to join Chu Xiu and listen to Chu Xiu's command, this did not mean that he had submitted to Chu Xiu. Therefore, there was no need for him to stand up for Chu Xiu. Whether Chu Xiu could deal with the heavenly treasure temple today depended entirely on him. Meng Xinghe would not interfere at this time. Chu Xiu did not directly mention that he wanted to borrow the heavenly treasure temple's territory. He only said in a deep voice, "What does the revered one of the world exalt think about the passage you discovered in the South Sea?" The revered one of the world exalt shook his head lightly. "That is a predestined fate. Our ancestors found the Daoist Ocean and escaped with their lives during the great calamity of the ancient times 10,000 years ago. But now that that world has descended, it is a predestined fate for us. It is a predestined fate that has not been completed 10,000 years ago." Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Even if it is a predestined fate, we will not sit still and wait for death. Dean Meng has already told me about that world. It is the Yellow Springs heaven of the 5 great heavenly realms. It is the ultimate home of all things. It contains countless evil yin energy, which gives birth to countless vengeful spirits and evil ghosts. Letting those things enter the lower realm and then come to the Daoist Ocean is our predestined fate. Therefore, I only want to ask the revered one of my questions. Is the heavenly treasure temple willing to follow the lead of the Kunlun devil cult and resist the invasion of the Yellow Springs heaven together?" The revered one of the world exalt said, "But the revered one of the heavenly treasure temple's leaders had once asked you to join forces, but the one behind you refused." Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "This time, I'm not here to join forces with the heavenly treasure temple. For such matters, we do not need an alliance or a voice. We only need one person to command the overall situation. This person can only be the Kunlun devil cult, and it must be the Kunlun devil cult." The revered one of the world exalt raised his eyebrows and said, "But doesn't Cult Master Chu think that this condition of yours is a bit harsh?" Chu Xiu nodded and said, "It is indeed harsh. However, in return for a plum, I will similarly compensate the heavenly net treasure Buddhist. For example, Dean Meng Xinghe. Dean Meng has already agreed to this condition." The revered one of the world exalt looked at Meng Xinghe, and Meng Xinghe also nodded. This made the revered one of the world exalt even more puzzled. What did Chu Xiu agree to that Meng Xinghe was willing to agree to such an excessive condition? Moreover, according to the revered one of the world exalt's knowledge, Meng Xinghe seemed to have a certain grudge against Chu Xiu. Then, I wonder what Cult Master Chu is willing to compensate the heavenly treasure temple? Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "Is the Kunlun devil cult support enough?" The revered one of the world exalt laughed and shook his head. "The Sanskrit sect has already been destroyed. The heavenly treasure temple now has no enemies. What's the use of the Kunlun devil cult's support?" Chu Xiu said indifferently, it's precisely because the Sanskrit sect has been destroyed that the Heavenly Treasure Temple needs the Kunlun devil cult support. Previously, when the Western region's Buddhist sect was fighting, the Dao sect was just watching from the side. Now, the Buddhist sect is only left with the Heavenly Treasure Temple. Will the Dao sect continue to watch from the sidelines? Will the Heavenly Treasure Temple be willing to be content in a corner? Now that the great calamity has arrived and the Yellow Springs heaven is about to invade, saying these things would be suspected of inciting internal strife. However, if we survive the great calamity, the Heavenly Treasure Temple has no choice but to consider these things. If the Heavenluan Treasure Dharma is willing to lead the Kunlun demon sect through this calamity, then our Kunlun demon sect will be willing to support the Heavenluan Treasure Dharma, and even get the 3 countries to agree to let the Buddhist sect spread the Tao. Although I'm of the devil path, I cultivate both Tao, Buddhism, and devil path. I don't have any sectarian bias. The world's honored one was silent for a while and suddenly said, "What if I don't agree?" Chu Xiu smiled and said, "In this world, no one can threaten a 9th Heaven Supreme Expert, and no 9th Heaven Supreme Expert will be threatened. Even if the one behind me comes and oppresses the Heavenly Treasure Temple with his powerful strength, I believe the Heavenly Treasure Temple won't yield. Therefore, if the world's honored one doesn't agree, then I can only retreat. As for the future Yellow Springs Heaven invasion and something even further in the future, I can't think too much about it. Everything will depend on the will of the heavens." The world's honored one was silent for a while and finally asked, "Can I believe Cult Master Chu's words?" A smile appeared on Chu Xiu's face because the world's honored one's words meant that he had already agreed. A monk doesn't lie. I, Chu Xiu, am a man of my words. Everyone in the pugilistic world knows this. Even Dean Meng trusts me. Naturally, the world's honored one is the same. The honored one of the world heaved a sigh of relief and said, "That's good. Today, this poor monk will trust Cult Master Chu. I only hope that Cult Master Chu won't disappoint this poor monk, don't disappoint the Heavenly Luo Treasure Rakshasa, and don't disappoint the millions of martial artists in great overarching heaven and the lower realm." This time, Chu Xiu still had the initiative because only Chu Xiu knew what was going on in Yellow Springs Heaven. The world's honored one and the others thought that they had made a mistake by opening the passage to Yellow Springs Heaven. In fact, only Chu Xiu knew that they had just moved the time forward. Even without them, when the Life Soul prepared everything, the passageway would naturally open. Therefore, the world's honored one and the others were the most eager to form an alliance. At this time, even if it wasn't an alliance and they had to listen to Chu Xiu's orders, they could still accept it to a certain extent. Anyway, this was only temporary and not forever. Moreover, they all believed that Chu Xiu was not an idiot. Naturally, he would not allow Yellow Springs Heaven to invade. "Oh, by the way, I have one more thing to ask the world's honored one for," Chu Xiu suddenly said. "Oh, what is it?" Chu Xiu chuckled and said, "It's just a small matter. I just want to set up an array in the Heavenly Treasure Temple to help me enter the 9th Heaven." Chapter 1459. When Chu Xiu told the World Venerable that he wanted to borrow the power of providence from the lower realm to enter the 9th Heaven and that he needed to set up a formation in the Tian Luo Treasure Temple, the World Venerable agreed without hesitation. Since he had already agreed to Chu Xiu's harsh conditions, this small matter was naturally nothing. Meng Xinghe, who was at the side, was a bit dumbfounded. He knew the main purpose of Chu Xiu's trip, but he didn't expect Chu Xiu to use such a stealthy method to solve this problem without any bloodshed. If Chu Xiu told the World Venerable that he wanted to use the Tian Luo Treasure Temple to set up a formation, the World Venerable would definitely not agree. Both parties would even discuss conditions and so on. But now, Chu Xiu used the pressure from Yellow Springs Heaven and his promise to make the Tian Luo Treasure Temple his own people. If Chu Xiu went to talk to the World Venerable about this matter, there was almost no need to think about it. The stronger Chu Xiu was, the the more confident they would be in sealing Yellow Spring's heaven and the stronger the support of the Kunlun devil cult in the future. Now, Meng Xinghe finally knew how Chu Xiu built the Kunlun devil cult from the bottom up. Although Chu Xiu did things unscrupulously, it had to be said that this method was really effective. Chu Xiu smiled and cupped his hands at the World Venerable. "Thank you for the convenience of the Tianluo Treasure Temple." The World Venerable suddenly said, "Since I choose to trust the cult master Chu, I might as well trust him to the end. It just so happens that I have a problem regarding the cult master Chu. Today, I will solve it all at once." Then, the World Venerable suddenly said, "Go and call the hall masters of the other halls." After a while, a disciple outside called all the hall masters of the Tianluo Treasure Temple into the main hall. Among those people were Rama and Shuyun. The two of them had both reached the martial immortal realm, and were now the Heavenly Net Treasure Temple's hall chiefs. However, when Rama saw Chu Xiu, he was only slightly stunned. However, Su-yun did not hide his hatred at all. "Su-yun, come out," the world sovereign suddenly said. Su-yun stood up with some doubts. But in the next moment, the revered one of the world suddenly stretched out his hand. The Buddha-light lotus seat suddenly rose from under Su-yun's feet and imprisoned him within. "Revered one, what are you doing?" Shuyun's expression changed and he shouted. The other peak seats were also confused. They did not know why the revered one of the world would make a move against Su-yun. Previously, when the revered one of the world knew that the Great Light Temple and the Sabodhi Monastery had come to seek refuge, he had specifically said to treat the martial artists of these two sects as one family and not to let them be divided. Why did he suddenly attack Su-yun now? The world sovereign didn't care about Su-yun's voice. Instead, he stretched his hand and pulled out a struggling black figure from Su-yun's body. Tan sect's evil thoughts. Zen Master Jishan's expression instantly changed. Back in the Divine Origin Palace, he had thought that Tan sect's evil thoughts had died. In the end, he did not expect it to possess Su-yun's body and hide within the heavenly Luo Buddha. When he thought of that, Zen Master Jishan broke out in a cold sweat. Such an existence had infiltrated the heavenly Luo Buddha. If it accumulated enough power and attacked the heavenly Luo Buddha from the inside, the harm it would cause to the heavenly Luo Buddha would be immeasurable. The world sovereign shook his head and said, "This is the cause and effect of my Buddhist sect. As long as the evil thoughts are not eliminated, they will exist forever. They cannot be killed. Since it was my heavenly Luo treasured Buddhist temple that sealed it 10,000 years ago, then it will be my heavenly Luo treasured Buddhist temple that will seal it again." With that, the revered one of the world made a move as the Tanzong evil will wailed. Boundless Buddhist light formed a lotus platform and sealed the Tanzong evil will within. Tan sect's evil thoughts were extracted from Su-yun's body. His strength dropped from the martial immortal realm and he became extremely weak. Su-yun put his palms together and chanted, "Thank you, world sovereign, for saving me. I didn't know that this thing had been hiding in my body for so long." The honored one of the world shook his head and sighed. "A monk doesn't lie. You've already become a devil and have completely forgotten the rules and precepts of my Buddhist sect." Su-yun's expression changed and he defended himself, "I didn't. I really didn't know that thing possessed me." The world sovereign said in a deep voice, "Actually, from the first time I saw you, I knew that Tan sect's evil thoughts were on you. However, I didn't do anything. I just wanted to see what you wanted to do. Su-yun, your talent is among the top even in the heavenly Luo Buddha. Your future achievement will definitely be above the 7th layer of heaven. Sadly, your state of mind has been contaminated by the demon in your heart. Letting you continue to grow is actually harming you. Go to the Daoist ocean and cultivate in seclusion. When you can let go of the demon in your heart, I will return your cultivation to you." As the world sovereign spoke, he lightly tapped Su-yun's body. Immediately, a large amount of Buddha light surged into Su-yun's body. However, it took away his power and his cultivation kept dropping. Su-yun struggled and roared, I don't accept this. The heavenly Luo Buddha is known as the ancestral land of the Buddhist sect, but why don't you take revenge for the Great Light Temple? Since Chu Xiu is here, you must be working with him, right? The ancestor of the Buddhist sect, the world sovereign of the heavenly Luo Buddha, is working with a demon who brings chaos to the world. You say I'm a demon, but you're the real demon. The world sovereign's expression didn't change at all. Su Yun's power was gradually taken away. In the end, he fainted and became an ordinary person. Chu Xiu shook his head. He didn't expect Su Yun to hate him to this extent. Su Yun was in the heavenly Luo Buddha and had a bright future, but he still chose to merge with the Tan sect's evil thoughts. He was probably preparing to take revenge on him. Of course, with Chu Xiu's current power and realm, he naturally wasn't afraid of this so-called revenge. Most of the grudges in the past stemmed from their standpoint. In reality, there was no right or wrong. It could only be said that people in the world had no choice. However, through this incident, Chu Xiu truly understood the world sovereign. This person's mind was very deep. Since the world sovereign returned, he could tell that something was wrong with Su Yun with one glance. In the end, he hid it. Today, if the world sovereign didn't decide to ally with Chu Xiu and become one of his own, he probably wouldn't have exposed Su Yun. Instead, he would have kept it as a preparation. After Su Yun was taken away, Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Since this is the case, time waits for no man. I will let Principal Meng set up the array in the heavenly Luo Buddha." The world sovereign nodded and said, "Sure. Later, I will personally protect the array for official Chu." Meng Xinghe was a ninth heavens expert. Similarly, Xinghe Lu's cultivator's research on array had reached an extreme. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Meng Xinghe was the #1 array master in the world. His method of setting up the array was naturally incomparably agile. All kinds of materials changed and combined in Meng Xinghe's hands. The Dao pattern's drawing speed was simply scribbling in the eyes of others. However, it was incomparably smooth and natural in Meng Xinghe's hands. Meng Xinghe said that an array would take a day to set up. In reality, he was being modest. He had already finished setting up the array in half a day. Apart from the heavenly Luo Buddha, the remaining array formations in West Chu and Northern Yen were simply completed when the conditions were right. As long as Chu Xiu informed the Northern Yen and West Chu imperial families of his request, the imperial families of both sides would immediately send people to seal off the area and clean up all the sects and forces in the surroundings. They would also send people to protect the area as if Chu Xiu's order was an imperial edict. Seeing this scene, Meng Xinghe sighed inwardly. It was no wonder that Chu Xiu could obtain the lower realm's providence. The imperial families of the three countries all regarded Chu Xiu as their backer. If Chu Xiu didn't control the lower realm's providence, who else could? Even without Chu Xiu, Meng Xinghe wouldn't be able to achieve what Chu Xiu did if he was given enough time. After arranging the positions of these three formations, Meng Xinghe deduced the most central location of these three formations based on the positions of these three formations. It was the last place where all the power of providence gathered. It was also the place where Chu Xiu would finally step into the ninth heaven. However, that place made Chu Xiu slightly stunned. Because according to Meng Xinghe's calculations, that place turned out to be Wei County's Tongzhou Prefecture, Chu Xiu's hometown, in this life. He had entered this world from the Tongzhou Prefecture. Now, he was about to reach the ninth layer of the heavens there and step into the peak. Chu Xiu could not help but feel puzzled. Could it be that everything he had experienced was truly fate? Was it really arranged by someone else that he was able to reach this stage? Seeing that Chu Xiu was stunned, Meng Xinghe asked curiously, "Cult Master Chu, what's wrong with you? Is there something wrong with Tongzhou Prefecture? Is there something difficult to deal with?" Chu Xiu came back to his senses and smiled. "No, Tongzhou Prefecture is very normal. I'm just thinking about some old friends." Chu Xiu's self-doubt didn't last long. To him, no matter who he was in his previous life or whose split soul he was Chu Xiu in this life. He could only be Chu Xiu. There were old friends of Chu Xiu in Tongzhou Prefecture, but Chu Xiu had no intention of catching up with them. He immediately started setting up the array formation on Shangmang Mountain outside Tongzhou Prefecture, preparing to step into the ninth heaven. After Meng Xinghe finished setting up the array formation, he said in a deep voice, "Cult Master Chu, you can enter now. I'll activate the array formation later." Xinghe's unfettered cultivator's lineage has perfected the array formation and all kinds of calculations to gather the power of providence. There won't be any danger through the calculations. Therefore, if the array formation's power is beyond imagination, Cult Master Chu, please don't mind it. If you resist and cause the array formation to shatter, everything will be for naught. Chu Xiu nodded. Meng Xinghe began to pour his power into the array formation and activated it. Meng Xinghe couldn't play any tricks at this time, nor did he dare. Although Tianhun wasn't Dugu Weiwa, he was still able to act like Dugu Weiwa, intimidating everyone. At this time, no one dared to play any tricks. Chapter 1460. The power of the Great Formation of Fortune exceeded both Chu Xiu and Meng Xinghe's imagination. This was because the Xinghe loose cultivator had never used this thing ever since it had been developed. Hence, its effects had been calculated. It might be weaker or stronger. However, it now seemed that the Xinghe loose cultivator had underestimated the power of the Great Formation of Fortune. The moment Meng Xinghe activated the Great Formation, Eastern Qi, Western Chu, and Northern Yen simultaneously exploded with a pillar of light that soared to the heavens. The power of the pillar made everyone involuntarily raise their heads to look at it. A burst of power erupted from each of the three pillars of light and gathered above the Tongzhou Prefecture. This power was invisible and could not be sensed by outsiders. However, at this moment, the Lord of the World and the Heavenly Soul, who was recovering his strength in the Kunlun Devil cult, looked in the direction of Tongzhou Prefecture at the same time. The invisible power of fortune continuously poured into Chu Xiu's body. This power was very gentle and was not as violent as the power of the origin of yin and yang. After Chu Xiu refined this power, he did not feel any backlash at all. At this moment, Chu Xiu had a feeling that his will and spirit seemed to be connected to this world. Farmers planted in the spring and harvested in the autumn. Students studied diligently. The people of the martial arts world were happy to settle debts of gratitude and enmity. They dominated the world. Everyone's emotions were rooted in this land, and everyone was born on this land. All sorts of joys and sorrows, as well as all sorts of joys and sorrows, echoed in Chu Xiu's mind. However, it was like a spring breeze caressing his face, allowing him to perceive these things. It did not cause any backlash to his memories. After an unknown period of time, when Chu Xiu opened his eyes, he was already in the ninth heaven. Meng Xinghe smiled and cupped his hands together. Congratulations to Cult Master Chu for stepping into the ninth heaven and becoming a top expert. When Chu Xiu opened his eyes, the first thing he asked was, "What is the ninth heaven? What kind of power does the nine heavens represent?" Meng Xinghe was slightly taken aback by Chu Xiu's question, but he still answered subconsciously, "The ninth heaven is the pinnacle of power. What else can it be?" As he spoke, Meng Xinghe stretched out a finger, and a flame appeared on it. Just like this flame, it will be extinguished in the wind, it will also be extinguished in the water, but in my hands, it will not be extinguished. The rules of this world make water and fire counter each other, but we, the supreme experts of the nine heavens, control the power of rules and distort the rules, allowing water and fire to fuse and never extinguish. After saying that, Meng Xinghe condensed a ball of water in his other hand. The two of them fused and traces of flames entered the ball of water, causing the entire ball of water to be covered with orange flames. It was an extremely magnificent sight. There was a reason why Meng Xinghe was able to establish the Star River Martial Courtyard. His understanding of martial arts and his understanding of strength could be said to have returned to its natural state. It was very thorough, and his explanation was very clear and vivid. But at this moment, the corners of Chu Xiu's mouth curled into a smile. He really had to thank Meng Xinghe. After stepping into the 9 heavens with the power of destiny, he had gained more than warriors who had stepped into the 9 heavens through normal means. Perhaps even the ancestors of Xinghe loose cultivators' lineage had not predicted this. Dean Meng, let's go back. It's time to discuss the problem of the Netherworld Heaven. When Chu Xiu and Meng Xinghe rushed all the way back to the Kunlun Devil cult, he found that Heavenly Soul had already come out of seclusion, and all the disciples of the Kunlun Devil cult were also on guard as if they were facing a formidable enemy. What's going on? Chu Xiu asked. Elder Wei's expression was solemn as he said, "There's news from the South Sea that there's some movement in the Netherworld Heaven." After discovering the Netherworld Heaven, Chu Xiu had already suggested the 6th Devil Palm and the other sects to move inward. At the same time, he had also sent some warriors to monitor the movements in the overseas region from afar. When Chu Xiu stepped into the 9 heavens, there had already been some movement in the overseas region. The space portal in the South Sea has been completely opened. A large number of Netherworld heavens, Elder Wei did not know what to call them. In the end, he could only say, a large number of Netherworld heavens' existences have been dispatched, all the way to the Central Plains. Among them are the 4 great demon lords, and there are also 2 sword cultivators, suspected to be Sword Saint Gu Qingcheng and Sword Emperor Shen Kangwu. No life spirits? Elder Wei shook his head and said, only them, no one else. At this moment, someone suddenly came to report that Dao Master had come to visit. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. He knew that Dao Master would definitely come at this time. Let's go and see Dao Master first. In the meeting hall of the Kunlun Devil cult, when Dao Master saw Meng Xinghe walking out behind Chu Xiu, he was slightly stunned. However, Dao Master thought that Meng Xinghe had also heard the news, which was why he had come. Dao Master said in a deep voice, "Cult Master Chu, you should know the news from the South Sea. The invasion of Netherworld Heaven is a great calamity. 10,000 years ago, when the ancient calamity came, we could find a Daoist to protect ourselves. But now, we can't find a second Daoist. The only thing we can do now is to join forces and fight against Netherworld Heaven together." Chu Xiu said lightly, "We can resist Netherworld Heaven, but the Kunlun Devil cult will not accept joining forces. If Dao Master wants to fight against Netherworld Heaven together, then the 3 Pristines Temple must listen to the command of the Kunlun Devil cult." Dao Master frowned and said, "The 3 Pristines Temple has never been in the habit of listening to others' orders. We didn't before, but we can now." Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, "This is the bottom line of the Kunlun Devil cult, and it cannot be refuted. If the 3 Pristines Temple really can't accept it, then we can only be alone and fight alone." Although Chu Xiu and the other Daoist experts all wanted to seal Netherworld Heaven, the difference was that Chu Xiu had one more goal than them, which was to deal with the life soul. Therefore, the command of the entire Wulin of the upper and lower realms must be in Chu Xiu's hands. The Wulin of the lower realms was easy to deal with. Even Yi Xiaonan and the old Taoist master, who stood at the peak, would listen to him, but the Daoist experts in the 9th heaven were not so easy to deal with. Dao Master laughed and said, "Cult Master Chu seems to have said it the other way around. The only one who will be alone is the Kunlun Devil cult." Meng Xinghe coughed and said, "Please forgive me, Dao Master. I have already promised Cult Master Chu to join the Kunlun Devil cult and listen to the orders of the Kunlun Devil cult." Dao Master frowned slightly when he heard this. Didn't Meng Xinghe have a grudge against Chu Xiu? Why would he rush to join Chu Xiu? Before Dao Master could say anything, the voice of the world came from outside again. "Cult Master Chu, Netherworld Heaven has begun to take action. Are you prepared?" When the world walked into the hall and saw that everyone was present, he nodded slightly and said, "Since everyone is here, it couldn't be better." Seeing the tone of the world, Dao Master couldn't help but ask, "Have you agreed to Cult Master Chu's conditions?" The world coughed and said, "Currently, the Kunlun Devil cult is the most powerful. Rather than having the alliance quarrel endlessly, it's better for the Kunlun Devil cult to take command alone." Chu Xiu spread his hands and said to Dao Master, "Now, it's up to Dao Master Chu how to choose." Dao Master thought for a while and shook his head gently. For the safety of the lower realm and the Daoist people, the Three Pristines Temple is willing to listen to Cult Master Chu's command. I only hope that Cult Master Chu won't disappoint us. Seeing that Dao Master agreed so quickly, Chu Xiu was slightly stunned. This wasn't Dao Master's style. If he became the leader of the resistance against Netherworld Heaven and won, it would greatly increase the reputation of his sect in the pugilistic world. Moreover, Dao Master was never the kind of person who was willing to submit to others. However, Chu Xiu didn't say anything else. He just said in a low voice, "In that case, let's make a plan first. With our current strength, it's far from enough to deal with Netherworld Heaven." The world looked at Tianhun behind Chu Xiu in surprise. "Even you can't deal with those from Netherworld Heaven?" Tianhun spread his hands and said, "I can deal with them, but do you really think that there are only a few experts comparable to the ninth heaven in Netherworld Heaven? Since the lower realm's pugilistic world could produce me, how do you know that there isn't anyone in Netherworld Heaven who can match me? That person is the one we should be worried about." The world was slightly puzzled. Why were Chu Xiu and Dugu Weiwei so sure that there was someone in Netherworld Heaven who could match them? Also, he felt that Dugu Weiwei's attitude seemed a little strange. The entire Kunlun Devil cult seemed to be led by Chu Xiu instead of the leader of the Devil cult from 500 years ago. At this time, Chu Xiu's words interrupted the world's contemplation. "Everyone, at present, in Netherworld Heaven, there are not only the four existences comparable to the ninth heaven, but also two more powerful sword cultivators. Their cultivation is even higher than those four. If we want to deal with them, we need to increase the number of people here. It's not enough now." The world shook his head and said, "It was enough before, but since you killed the leader of the Brahmin sect, it's not enough now." Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "Who said it's not enough? There are many experts in the mortal world and the Daoist. As long as we want to find them, we can always find them. I have the confidence to ask the old barbarian king to come out from the Daoist, but I need you to give some benefits to the barbarian tribe." The world master frowned and said, "Barbarian tribe? You want to use them?" Chu Xiu said calmly, "It has already come to this, who cares about the barbarian race or not? We are all in the same boat. Moreover, the barbarian tribe has already weakened to such a state. They are no longer a threat to you. So, what are you afraid of?" Meng Xinghe, the world, and the world master looked at each other. Meng Xinghe shrugged indifferently. He had already given the law of providence to Chu Xiu, so he didn't care about the power of the Star River Martial Arts Institute. Therefore, it didn't matter whether the barbarian tribe was weak or strong. In the end, the world master and the world master could only nod in agreement. They were not short-sighted people. Compared to Netherworld Heaven, the threat of the barbarian tribe was not a big deal to them. Chapter 1461. Daoist, in the depths of the south. When the old barbarian king saw Chu Xiu again, he was a little surprised. "Aren't you fighting in the mortal world? How come you still have time to see this old man?" The old barbarian king knew about the matter of the Daoist in the mortal world. In fact, with the old barbarian king's strength, even if he couldn't refine the heavenly key, he could just casually threaten a big sect and someone would take the initiative to hand over the key to him. But the old barbarian king didn't want to do so, or rather, he had no interest in the mortal world. The roots of the barbarian race were in the Daoist, and they only cared about their own territories. No matter how much the Daoist experts were in the mortal world, it had nothing to do with the barbarians. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, I came here this time because I have an important matter to discuss with you, old barbarian king. Chu Xiu had also told the old barbarian king everything that Dao Venerables and the others knew about the Yellow Springs heaven. After listening, the old barbarian king suddenly sneered and said, if I say that this is retribution, will you believe me? 10,000 years ago, the martial artists of the mortal world invaded the Daoist, just like the current invasion of Yellow Springs heaven. The cycle of cause and effect, retribution. Did they ever think that they would also usher in such a day? Chu Xiu shook his head and said, it's not the same. Yellow Springs heaven is not a place where humans live. Their invasion of the mortal world will also affect the Daoist. You should be able to guess this. The old barbarian king was silent for a moment and suddenly said, what conditions did they put forward? The old barbarian king was a rare wise man among the barbarians. In other words, his way of thinking was very similar to that of the human race. If it was any other barbarian patriarch, perhaps he would have already thought of taking the opportunity to attack the Daoist from the rear to avenge the enmity of 10,000 years ago. But the old barbarian king undoubtedly saw further than them. Although he was angry in his heart, there was no doubt that he would take a stand. However, they could attack, but they, the barbarian tribe, could not do it for free. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, the eastern domain and the southern domain will each give 1/5 of their territories to the barbarians. All kinds of formation materials were traded with the barbarians at normal prices. If the old barbarian king is willing to help, I can also open the passage to the lower realm, and let the barbarians descend to the lower realm to accept the true fire to refine their body. I can guarantee that the strength of the barbarian lineage will greatly increase. Originally, this condition was already the limit of Dao Master and the others. However, Chu Xiu was not afraid of the rise of the barbarians. His only enemy now was the netherworld heaven and his life soul. Therefore, Chu Xiu told the old barbarian king about all the cards in his hand. Moreover, he also promised him some benefits. Seeing that the old barbarian king wanted to say something, Chu Xiu directly said, I have already told you all my cards, old barbarian king. So, there is no need to probe further. Although I am willing to promise more to the barbarians, you also know that Dao Master and World Master are already at their limit. The old barbarian king sighed and nodded. He also knew the character and way of doing things of Dao Master and World Master. It was indeed Chu Xiu's limit for him to offer such conditions. Forget it. This old man will go with you. However, I will be the only one in the barbarian race. The others will not go with you. My barbarian race doesn't have many people left, and we can't afford to lose them. Chu Xiu nodded and said, no problem. As long as the old barbarian king, a 9th celestial layer powerhouse, took action, it would be enough. The other experts in the lower realm did not lack people. When Chu Xiu came to persuade the old barbarian king, he had already instructed Wei Shuya to mobilize the entire lower realm. On the northern Yen side, Chu Xiu's words carried great weight. On the western Chu side, the moon-worshipping cult and the celestial master mansion were also taking the lead. On the eastern Qi side, the true martial cult and other Taoist sects were also present. In addition, the prestige of Chu Xiu and the eastern Qi imperial court had mobilized almost all the forces. Therefore, when Chu Xiu returned with the old barbarian king, the entire Kunlun devil cult had already been occupied by the experts who had come to discuss matters. The situation in the netherworld heaven was urgent. It couldn't be delayed. Chu Xiu waved his hand. Everyone immediately gathered in the main hall of the Kunlun devil cult square, and waited for Chu Xiu's command. Chu Xiu stood in front of the rootless sacred flame and looked at the dense crowd below. Some were familiar, and some were unfamiliar. Even Chu Xiu could not help but sigh with emotion. Some of these people used to be Chu Xiu's friends, such as Mo Tianlin, Xia Xiaolu, and Fang Qi Shao, who had also come with the whole Sword King city. There were also some who used to be enemies, such as Mu Baishuang and the Chunyang Dao sect leader Ling Yunzi, who had always been against Chu Xiu and formed the demon-killing alliance. However, they had never won against him. Now, these people had gathered here because of the netherworld heaven. They only had one goal, and that was to survive. Chu Xiu might be their enemy, but in the face of the unknown and terrifying existence of the netherworld heaven, they would rather follow the orders of their enemy. Looking at the people present, Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "I'm very surprised to see all of you here at the top of the Kunlun mountain." Perhaps some people had thought of flattening this place. But now, we have to unite together to fight against the foreign enemy. I think some people will definitely feel very uncomfortable. Ling Yunzi and the others looked around. They were the ones who felt uncomfortable. If there was a word to describe their current mood, it would be that fate made a fool out of them. Perhaps, even they themselves had not expected that there would be a day when they would gather in the Kunlun demon sect. It wasn't to kill Chu Xiu and annihilate the Kunlun demon sect, but to listen to Chu Xiu's orders. Chu Xiu continued, "However, there's no need for all of you to feel awkward. There's no such thing as an eternal enemy in this world. Today, you and I are standing together, and we're fighting for the entire lower realm, for the entire absolute heaven. 10,000 years ago, during the great calamity of the ancient times, the human race did not perish. Whether it was the Daoist people or the lower realm, there was life and reproduction. Today, it is the same. The future of the lower realm and the Daoist people is in your hands. Right now, Chu Xiu could be said to command the entire Daoist people and the lower realm. He had truly reached the peak. Even Dugu Weiwei of the past had not received this kind of treatment. Dugu Weiwei was only able to make everyone fear him and attack him together. However, he was not able to command so many experts. But at this time, a long speech would only annoy everyone, so these two simple sentences were enough. Today, everyone stood here not to fight for themselves, nor for Chu Xiu, but for the entire lower realm and the Daoist people. In particular, some of the martial artists from the lower realm who came from ordinary sects seemed to have a sense of mission, as if they were witnessing history. Taking out a map, Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "The existence of Yellow Springs Heaven crossed the South Sea and entered the 100,000 mountains. Their goal was the West Chu capital. But in reality, they should be heading for the West Chu Dragon Vein. Previously, I killed these existences from Yellow Springs Heaven in the West Chu Dragon Vein. They came here to steal the power of the Dragon Vein and pour it into the Yellow Springs Heaven. You might not be able to feel the power of the Dragon Vein on normal days, but once the power of the Dragon Vein is stolen, we will be facing a true calamity. The earth will overturn, the rivers will dry up, and floods and droughts will follow. It will even cause the origin chi to thin out. I think no one wants to see that kind of scene. So we must stop Yellow Springs Heaven in the 100,000 mountains and not let them take a single step into West Chu." This was not Chu Xiu exaggerating, but something he had comprehended after stepping into the 9th heavenly layer of martial immortal. At that moment, Chu Xiu seemed to have merged with heaven and earth and saw the will of this world. He naturally knew what the consequences would be after the power of the Dragon Vein was stolen. With a wave of his hand, tens of thousands of martial artists and Daoist elites left Kunlun Mountain and went straight to the 100,000 mountains, where the South Barbarian land was located. At this time, in the dense forest of the 100,000 mountains in the South Barbarian land, the 4 demon sovereigns and 2 sword-wielding martial artists crossed the 100,000 mountains and headed in the direction of West Chu. One of the 2 sword-wielding figures was a young man, and the other was an old man. The few of them were the same as those who had been resurrected before. Their bodies were gray, as if they were pieced together. But compared with Monk Longtu, some of the details on their bodies seemed to be more detailed. Their appearances did not change much, and they were even 90% similar to when they were alive. Behind them was a majestic army of monster race and demon race. Compared to them, the existences behind them could be considered a group of demons and ghosts. Among those existences, some were humanoid, but their appearances were ferocious and distorted. Some were even half-human, while the other half was bones. There were even some that were half-human and half-beast, or huge beasts formed by a group of bones. There were also some ghosts and wandering souls. These demons had endless netherworld chi overflowing from them. Wherever it passed, it infected the surrounding environment, turning the vitality into the aura of death. Even the flowers and trees withered instantly. It was very terrifying. When Chu Xiu led the martial arts elites from the upper and lower realms to intercept them, he saw such a scene. Those martial artists who had only heard of netherworld heaven but had not seen it with their own eyes all gasped. If these demons and ghosts were allowed to enter the hinterland of the Central Plains warriors, it would indeed be a disaster, a great calamity. Chu Xiu spoke to Tianhun telepathically, "Is that Sword Saint Gu Qingsheng and Sword King Shen Kangwu?" Tianhun nodded and said, "That's them." 500 years ago, Gu Qingsheng occupied 6% of the world's swordsmanship, and Shen Kangwu occupied 4%. The two of them could represent the swordsmanship of the entire martial arts world. The rest of the people, who are not even worth mentioning, are the other swordsmen. Chu Xiu squinted and looked at the four demon lords and the others. He suddenly realized something strange. Whether it was the four demon lords, Sword Saint, or Sword King, they did not seem to have their own consciousness. There were two kinds of existences that had been resurrected 500 years ago. One was like Monk Longtu and Hua Nongyue, who had all their memories from 500 years ago and could think. The other was like the previous Heaven Master, who had completely lost their consciousness. These people could be said to be Tianhuan's trusted subordinates, but they did not seem to have consciousness. They were just puppets. Chapter 1462. The demons in Netherworld Heaven did not have any intelligence. They seemed to only have the purest desire to destroy. The four demon venerables and the others seemed to have no consciousness and would only act according to orders. Therefore, at this time, Chu Xiu and the others were standing in front of them, but they did not stop at all. Instead, they went straight to the warriors of the upper and lower realms. They did not set up a battle formation, but they rushed over like a sharp arrow. Jianghu Demon Venerable stood at the forefront. He pointed the blood-red spear in his hand, and his aura was so sharp that it seemed to be able to split mountains and split the earth. Behind him, countless demons and ghosts from the Yellow Springs Heaven roared and charged forward. Wherever they passed, the powerful Yin Qi would contaminate everything, causing the surrounding trees to instantly wither like a grayish-white line. "Everyone, let's do it. Dean Meng, Dao Master, it's up to you." Meng Xinghe and Dao Master nodded. The disciples of the Star River Martial Arts Academy and Three Pristine's Temple immediately unfolded the formation discs around them. The demons from Netherworld Heaven only knew how to kill brainlessly, but the warriors of the upper and lower realms would not do so. When it came to the formation, Three Pristine's Temple and Star River Loose Cultivator could be said to be the strongest. Therefore, these two sects were the first to set up the formation. The formation of Three Pristine's Temple encompassed heaven and earth. The moment it was activated, the yin and yang of heaven and earth, as well as the power of the 5 elements and 8 extremes, all began to circulate wildly. The formation seemed to contain a world, instantly blocking the demons from Netherworld Heaven and killing them. The formation of the Star River Martial Arts Academy was aimed at their own people. The moment the formation was activated, countless bright stars descended and poured into the bodies of the people present. All the warriors found that at this moment, the speed of the flow and recovery of the genuine qi in their bodies began to skyrocket, which also meant that the power of their attacks would be greater. This kind of auxiliary formation was even more difficult to set up than the offensive formation. The offensive formation only needed to ensure the power, but this kind of auxiliary formation also needed to consider the strength of the warriors in the formation and so on. It was very complicated. On the netherworld heaven side, Demon Lord Skycry, who was shrouded in a black robe, stepped forward. The netherworld death chi was woven in his hands, but it did not turn into a formation. Instead, it turned into a formation pattern and integrated into the three pristine palaces formation. Dao Master suddenly found that with the integration of the formation patterns, he could not control the formation. The original power of Yin and Yang and the five elements were assimilated into the netherworld Yin Qi. Not only could it not kill the evil ghosts in the netherworld heaven, but it helped them recover their strength. Let's begin. Chu Xiu looked at Tian Hun and asked, "Which one will you choose?" Sky Soul raised his eyebrows and said, "Leave Gu Qingqing to me. That guy was very strong 500 years ago. He had the potential to reach the pinnacle of the ninth sky, but the environment prevented him from succeeding. Now that he has such an environment, I want to see just how strong he has become." After Sky Soul's voice fell, he went straight to Gu Qingqing in Yellow Spring Sky. Boundless dark clouds of devil chi shrouded Sky Soul's body. With one step, the whole world seemed to be under his feet, and a strong vibration broke out in the void. When his palm fell, it was the simplest heavenly demon palm, but the whole void was under his control. The place where his palm fell was the boundless devil's domain. Dao Master and the others looked at Tian Hun with a sense of relief. His strength was indeed superior to theirs. Fortunately, they did not make a move at that time. In Yellow Spring Sky, Gu Qingqing looked up at Sky Soul and pointed her long sword to the sky. It was a simple stab, but the boundless sharpness rushed straight up to the sky, like the rising sun. It tore the boundless darkness and tore the area under the heavenly demon palm apart. Although Gu Qingqing's body was no longer human, his power still came from Yellow Spring Sky. But his sword essence was not extinguished. It was still the powerful sword essence that had made Dugu Weiwei bleed 500 years ago. This had not faded. At this time, Dao Master and the others also made their moves and faced their opponents. Although Dao Master and the others were defeated by the four great demon lords last time, it did not mean that their strength was inferior to the four great demon lords. It was just that they were confused at that time and did not know what to do. So, they chose the most conservative strategy, which was to leave first and then gather the strength of the upper and lower realms to think of a solution. So this time, both sides changed their target. Among the four great demon lords, in terms of combat power, Martial Demon Lord was the strongest. His strength was so strong that even the World Lord was not a match for him. So this time, Martial Demon Lord was left to deal with Dao Master. With the various secret methods of Three Pristine Palace and Dao Master's strong foundation, there were more ways to deal with Martial Demon Lord. This time, the World Lord faced the Heartless Demon Lord. The Heartless Demon Lord's strength might not be as strong as Martial Demon Lord's, but his fighting style was fierce and fearless. Every move he made seemed as if he wanted to die with his opponent. This kind of madman's fighting style was already difficult to deal with 500 years ago. No one wanted to be an opponent of such a madman. Now that the Heartless Demon Lord had already died once, he had no concept of death. So, his attacks were even crazier than 500 years ago. Heavenly Luo Baosha's body refining technique was also unparalleled in the entire Daoist continent. At this time, the World Lord displayed his indestructible golden body and directly fought with the Heartless Demon Lord. He wanted to see who would be able to last longer. The old barbarian king faced the heaven-weeping demon lord. Among the four great demon lords, the heaven-weeping demon lord's fighting strength was the weakest. However, he also had the most methods. Formation Dao, Treasure Dao, Divination Dao, and so on. However, although he could use these things in battle, their power was somewhat insufficient. The old barbarian king cultivated the human race's martial arts. He also had a strong physique that was comparable to that of a demon god. He could use his strength to break through techniques. So, he had a certain advantage over the heaven-weeping demon lord. The Red Lotus demon lord was dealt with by Meng Xinghe. Xinghe Lu's cultivator had many secret techniques. Meng Xinghe himself was extremely calm and meticulous. The karmic fire of the Red Lotus had less effect on him compared to the others. Moreover, before the battle started, Meng Xinghe had already asked Mei Qinglian to display the karmic fire of the Red Lotus. After studying its characteristics, he had some confidence in dealing with the Red Lotus demon lord. The other disciples of the Kunlun devil cult also charged forward under Chu Xiu's command. However, Lu Jianghu was fighting while looking at the Red Lotus demon lord. Although he was very excited to see the Red Lotus demon lord again, he had already noticed that there was something wrong with the Red Lotus demon lord's gaze before Lu Jianghu could say anything. It was incomparably empty and indifferent. This was definitely not the Red Lotus demon lord in his memory. The one in the netherworld sky is not the sect leader. Lu Jianghu suddenly muttered in a low voice. Chu Xiu was preparing to fight Shen Kangwu. When he heard what Lu Jianghu said, he suddenly asked, "What did you say?" Lu Jianghu slapped a skeleton in front of him away and snorted coldly. Although Patriarch Dugu is a little cold, he would never treat Red Lotus and the others like puppets. 500 years have passed. The current Patriarch Dugu is no longer the Patriarch Dugu from 500 years ago. 500 years is enough to change a person. Lu Jianghu's words were filled with resentment. Perhaps he was unhappy that Dugu Weiwei had turned the 4 demon lords, or rather, the Red Lotus demon lord, into puppets that only knew how to fight. However, a strange look appeared in Chu Xiu's eyes when he heard this. He suddenly thought of something. At this moment, Shen Kangwu also went straight for Chu Xiu. With a light tap of his long sword, ripples appeared in the void. The sword cut through the sky, passing through time and space, and arrived in front of Chu Xiu. Sword Sovereign Shen Kangwu, a sword grandmaster who was second only to Gu Qingsheng 500 years ago. After Dugu Weiwei went to the Daoyu Ocean, even the heartless demon lord died in his hands. One could imagine that his strength was definitely a level higher than the 4 demon lords. Since stepping into the 9th heaven, this was the first time Chu Xiu had fought. However, this time, he no longer needed to familiarize himself with his power. With a light tap of his finger, the entire world seemed to be divided into 2, one yin and one yang. The 2 extreme powers overlapped and grinded against each other. With a loud explosion, the yin and yang exploded into the void, directly shattering the sword will. The magical power of the worldly millstone was now displayed by Chu Xiu in an incomparably casual manner. One finger was a magical power. At this moment, even the Dao masters, who were fighting fiercely with the 4 demon lords, could not help but look at Chu Xiu. When Chu Xiu gathered the fate to step into the 9th heaven, they sensed it. However, they did not understand that Chu Xiu had clearly just stepped into the 9th heaven, but his combat power was now a little too strong. In fact, this time, Chu Xiu really should thank Meng Xinghe. Right now, not only had Chu Xiu walked a path different from Dugu Weiwei, but he had also walked a path that no one had ever walked before. Gathering the fate of a world to step into the 9th heaven was something that no warrior in history had ever done. However, Chu Xiu did it, and the benefits it brought him were also unimaginable. What was the peak of the 9th heaven? Meng Xinghe's answer was to let the rules be completely under one's control and turn the impossible into the possible. But now, Chu Xiu's answer was that the peak of the 9th heaven was the limit of this world. The rules themselves were in this world, and they were already powerful enough. Why should he change them? Shen Kangwu's figure moved, and the sword qi around him rolled back, turning into thousands of sword qi that slashed at Chu Xiu. It seemed to cover the sky and the earth, and everything in sight had already been covered by the sword qi. His hands formed a seal, as if he was embracing heaven and earth. The entire void began to burst into waves of ripples, shrinking extremely, and replaying the chaos. Under the furnace of fate, all the sword chi melted. The formation was broken out of the sheath, and Chu Xiu's saber fell. However, this saber was not the ethereal cut, nor was it the devouring sky. Instead, it seemed to use the world as a saber, and it was the strongest saber that contained all the power. The saber momentum was invisible, and so was the saber intent. However, under this saber, the mountains and rivers were shattered, and the sea of clouds was tumbling. The sky was Qian, and the earth was Kun. This saber of Chu Xiu's was called Qian Kun. Chapter 1463. Level 9 was a new peak for Chu Xiu. The gap was huge. Compared to the peak of level 8, it was like heaven and earth. Martial arts were still the same martial arts, but when Chu Xiu used them, they were sublimated. Under single slice of the universe, everything was broken. It was like the sky and the earth were turned upside down. But Shen Kangwu's power was not that simple. Chu Xiu had very little information about this person. Chu Xiu had asked Sky Soul before, but the answer he got was that he did not know. 500 years ago, Shen Kangwu rarely made a move. This man could be said to have endured to the extreme, enduring all the way until Dugu Weiwa left the lower realm. Only then did he make a move to destroy the Kunlun demon sect. At this time, although Shen Kangwu's two moves were extremely powerful, Chu Xiu did not feel that Shen Kangwu was very strong. It should be said that Shen Kangwu was only at the level of an ordinary warrior in the ninth heaven. This was too far from the legendary Sword Emperor Shen Kangwu. At least Chu Xiu felt that he had overestimated Shen Kangwu. But the next moment, Shen Kangwu's sword slashed, and the whole world became blurry. It was almost visible to the naked eye. The rules and the space were annihilated, and only a sword air remained. Chu Xiu's single slice of the universe could shatter the universe, but the laws in front of him had already been annihilated. When the saber force came close, it was cut off, as if it had slashed into endless chaos. The sound of the knife and the sword intertwined spread across the land. Chu Xiu frowned. Now, he knew what kind of swordsmanship Shen Kangwu was practicing. Chaos. What he was practicing was the power of chaos. The world was chaos. Life and death were one. Yin and yang were unclear. It contained all power, but it also destroyed all power. Strictly speaking, what Shen Kangwu practiced was not just a simple swordsmanship. It was a kind of martial arts. No wonder Sky Soul said that 500 years ago, Gu Qingsheng had taken 6 and Shen Kangwu had taken 4. What Shen Kangwu lacked was not only strength, but also persistence and attitude toward swordsmanship. As Shen Kangwu pinched the sword seal with his hand and used his fingers as a sword, the long sword in his hand split again. However, this time, it did not split into thousands of swords. Instead, it turned into a total of 12 chaos giant swords. Each of them was 100 feet tall. They pierced through the void and flew toward Chu Xiu, nailing him to the ground. Chaotic force encompassed everything, including the laws of space. Under this power, Chu Xiu could not find the direction of the 12 swords at all. He could only allow them to lock him down. The 12 giant swords were like a huge sword formation, sealing off the void, and endless chaotic mist wrapped around Chu Xiu. Under this power, all the laws were sealed. It was as if this area had returned to the ancient times, where no laws could be mobilized. Many of the warriors present saw that Chu Xiu was trapped and seemed to be at a disadvantage. Everyone looked nervous. It did not matter whether they had been friends or enemies with Chu Xiu. Now, Chu Xiu was the leader of both the upper and lower worlds. At this time, if Chu Xiu died or was severely injured, it would be a huge blow to them. However, the warriors and even the heavenly souls of the Kunlun devil cult looked calm. Although Sword Emperor Shen Kangwu was strong, no one believed that their leader would be at a disadvantage in this place. Xianxia held a long sword in his hand. Endless sharp sword aura lingered in the air and gathered around his body. This sword seemed to have gathered all the sharp aura on the battlefield. It turned into a giant sword that was 100 feet tall and slashed toward Chu Xiu, who was trapped. However, the next moment, the entire chaos sword formation seemed to explode, and a huge figure appeared. With his feet on the ground and his head in the sky, Chu Xiu used the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. However, it was slightly different from usual. At that moment, Chu Xiu had 3 faces and 4 arms. He also had 3 eyes on his head, which was somewhat similar to an original god. In the past, the original god Palace had created an original god according to the state of a perfect creature. Now, Chu Xiu's lawful embodiment of heaven and earth revealed an ancient demon god. Among the 3 faces, one was black and one was white. They represented the demon Buddha and yin and yang. In the center was Chu Xiu's face. He had 3 eyes on his head, and a huge yin and yang light pillar erupted from his eyes and pierced through the sharp sword aura. Boom, boom, boom. Every step that Chu Xiu took caused the entire ground to tremble. It was as if an earth dragon was turning over. The 4 arms behind him formed seals, but the seals they formed were all completely different. Heaven and Earth Millstone, Creation Furnace, Mahavirokana Seal, Worship of 10,000 Demons. Yin and Yang, Chaos, Buddha, Demon, and Creation. All kinds of powers mixed together and violently attacked Xianxia. Long swords formed by the sharpness of heaven and earth appeared around him, protecting him. However, under the impact of this powerful force, they began to break layer by layer. His sewn-up body was contaminated with the power of yin and yang, but in an instant, a large piece of his body fell off. He was like a statue that had been torn apart, and the surroundings were full of cracks. The strength of these experts who had been resurrected 500 years ago was indeed shocking. Xianxia's strength could even fight Dao Master one-on-one. However, it was a pity that their weakness was also extremely obvious. They could not be injured. As long as they were injured, a large part of their body would crack, and they would not be able to hold on for long. Against Xianxia, Chu Xiu's side was already stable. It was the same for the others. After changing their opponents and going all out, Dao Master and the others had already gained the upper hand. It had to be said that Dao Master's strength was really stable. Everyone was fighting with all their might, but Dao Master was not flustered at all. All kinds of Dao sect secret skills were thrown at Demon Venerable Jianghu like flowing water, directly causing his body to be covered with small wounds. At this time, as long as Dao Master found the right opportunity, he would be able to completely defeat his opponent with all his might. It was the same for the World Lord. He was more stable than the Dao Lord and had been on the defensive all along. However, the Heartless Demon Lord's fighting style had caused him to suffer quite a bit of backlash and he couldn't hold on much longer. Meng Xinghe, who was facing Red Lotus Demon Venerable, had completely gained the upper hand. Although Red Lotus Demon Venerable's Red Lotus Hellfire was strange, as long as he could defend against her Red Lotus Hellfire, everything else would not be a problem. Old Barbarian King was facing Sky Weep Demon Venerable, who had the weakest combat power. At the moment, the battle was almost over. Sky Weep Demon Venerable's arm had been completely destroyed, and he looked very miserable. As for Tian Hun and Gu Qingcheng, they were still fighting. This made Chu Xiu feel a little strange. Had Tian Hun recovered his strength? Although Gu Qingcheng was indeed powerful, and after being resurrected by the Netherworld Heaven, she had a combat power that surpassed most of the Ninth Heaven experts, Tian Hun should not have dragged on for so long. At that moment, Xianxia, who was being suppressed by Chu Xiu and whose body was about to shatter, suddenly experienced some changes. His grayish-white skin instantly turned black, and it was filled with dense netherworld yin aura. It was a power that was different from this world. Even martial immortals who controlled the power of rules could not command this power. Shen Kangwu's body instantly exploded, and countless dense netherworldine aura turned into a pitch-black demon sword. It tore the void, tore the rules, and ignored time and space. When it reappeared, it was already in front of Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu's expression changed instantly. He was very familiar with this power. It was the power of the demonic source, but it was the power of the netherworld heaven's demonic source. The life soul had grasped the method to split the source and poured a portion of the source power into Shen Kangwu's body. Chu Xiu's 4 arms formed seals behind his back. At the same time, he activated the source power of yin and yang in his body to resist it. However, Chu Xiu could only borrow the source power of yin and yang, while Shen Kangwu's body contained the main body of the source. Although there was only a trace of it, it was still the source. The demon god transformed phenomenon of heaven and earth was torn apart by the source sword. In the end, the yin-yang light pillar in the third eye above Chu Xiu's head bloomed to the extreme. Only then did it completely cancel out the trace of the source power. Chu Xiu heaved a sigh of relief. He had never expected the life soul to have such a move. It was simply using them as human bombs. However, at that moment, Chu Xiu's expression suddenly changed, and he shouted, "Be careful." Only then did he react. Since the life soul had grasped the method to split the source power, did it mean that the others also had the same arrangement? At that moment, the bodies of the 4 demon supremacies began to change. The heaven-weeping demon supremacy's body exploded. Countless netherworld yin chi weaved into threads and floated in the air. The bodies of the martial combat demon supremacy and the heartless demon supremacy also exploded at the same time. The netherworld yin chi surged into the threads of the heaven-weeping demon supremacy, eventually turning into lines of formation runes that completely locked Chu Xiu's body. Even if Chu Xiu used the source power of yin and yang, he could not tear it apart. At the same time, the red lotus demon supremacy also destroyed her own body. However, she did not turn into the netherworld yin chi. Instead, she turned into hell fire. She melted into the formation, and the light of the formation was instantly ignited. At that moment, Chu Xiu felt like he was in the yellow springs of the netherworld. Endless ghost chi burned around him, and he could not absorb any power at all. Even his own power was suppressed, and he could no longer sense any aura or rules in the outside world. Dao Master and the others did not expect that these people, who had been fighting with them so fiercely before, would destroy their own bodies in the blink of an eye to form a formation to target Chu Xiu. It was as if their target had been Chu Xiu from the very beginning. Moreover, they could not stop it even if they wanted to. That was the rule source of another world. Unless they were like Chu Xiu, who also had the source power, there was no way they could stop it by force. Among the existences in the Yellow Springs heaven, only Gu Qingqing did not destroy her own body. However, the netherworld yin chi that contained the power of the source exploded from the sword in her hand to entangle the heaven soul. At the same time, Gu Qingqing turned into a sword and slashed at Chu Xiu in the formation. Chapter 1464. Gu Qingqing turned into a sword. That was the purest sword Chu Xiu had ever seen. Even Dugu Weiwei, who had been invincible in the past, had bled under that sword. In that era, there were only 2 people who could make Dugu Weiwei bleed. One was Ning Xuanji, and the other was Gu Qingqing. Other people practiced sword skills with different elements. Among the sword elites Chu Xiu had seen, there was Shen Kangwu's chaos sword skill, which pointed to the origin of the path. There was also Fang Qishao's causal sword skill. It was very magical, and when he practiced it to the peak, he could also see the path. But Gu Qingqing's sword skill was the purest sword skill. It did not contain any elemental power. A sword was a sword, and a sword skill was a sword skill. Fang Qishao had asked Mu Baishuang what a sword skill was, but Mu Baishuang did not answer. If Gu Qingqing were to answer, he would say that he himself was the way of the sword. Trapped in the endless netherworld-underworld formation, the aura that belonged to netherworld heaven was constantly suppressing Chu Xiu, making him unable to mobilize any external power. The power of rules had been completely isolated at this moment. Facing Gu Qingsheng's sword, Chu Xiu's body was surrounded by the yin and yang power. Chu Xiu used his original power to the max. His third eye shone with a blurry light, suppressing Chu Xiu's body to prevent the original power from backfiring. Right now, the only thing Chu Xiu could use was the power within his body and the yin and yang essence power within his body. All other powers had been completely sealed up. The sword mind was in the air. It was invisible, but it was sharp enough to tear everything apart. The whole sky and earth started to twist as the yin and yang power and the sword air clashed. Chu Xiu used all his power he could, but Gu Qingsheng's sword shone even brighter. One sword to destroy a city. The magnificent sword light shone in front of Chu Xiu's eyes. It was as if there were only countless sword lights in this world and only this one sword. Just as the power of yin and yang and the power of the sword gradually dispersed, Chu Xiu's soul actually entered the world enveloped by countless strands of sword qi unknowingly. The expression of the heavenly soul, who had struggled to break free from the netherworld's yin qi, changed when he saw this. Be careful. That was the selfless sword realm. Don't let your primordial spirit fall into it. Tianhuan's warning was too late. Chu Xiu's mind was already immersed in it. The oblivious sword world wasn't a god power or a secret technique. After Gu Qingsheng burned all of her power, her sword mind reached the sky. She touched the origin of the world and pulled people into her Yuan spirit world. In this world, swordsmanship was the only rule, and swordsmanship was the only thing that existed. In the last battle between Gu Qingsheng and Dugu Weiwei, Gu Qingsheng had pulled Dugu Weiwei into the oblivious sword world. Although Dugu Weiwei had only been able to break free for a moment, she had successfully injured Dugu Weiwei and made him bleed. Now, Gu Qingsheng had reached the peak of the ninth sky. In the past, she had been able to pull Dugu Weiwei into the oblivious sword world for a moment. Now, how long could she pull Chu Xiu into it? At that moment, in the oblivious sword world, Chu Xiu could see swords. Everything in the world was also swords. This was a world made of swordsmanship. Gu Qingsheng stood in the center of the oblivious sword world. She looked indifferent. She waved her hand, and there was an endless amount of sword qi heading toward Chu Xiu. But even if it was just a battle of souls, Chu Xiu would not be easy to deal with. In the past, when he fought with the leader of Brahma, he had consumed the yin and yang soul power that the leader had left behind and refined it. Now, Chu Xiu's heart jumped. Two yin and yang powers came out of Chu Xiu's soul. They turned into two long swords. They were like two yin and yang dragons, and they killed the powerful sword qi that was coming at him. But after a while, Chu Xiu frowned. The situation was not looking good. When he fought with the leader of Brahma, Chu Xiu had pulled him into the 6 paths of reincarnation. He had defeated the leader in a battle of souls. But today, Gu Qingsheng had pulled him into the oblivious sword world and used the same method to deal with him. This was quite ironic. Was this karma? Right now, Chu Xiu was using the yin and yang power of his soul to form a sword. He could use a lot of power, but sword skills were not what he was good at. Even if he was good at it, it was useless. In a situation like this, if one's sword skills were not as good as Gu Qingsheng's, one would be suppressed. Even if Shen Kangwu was thrown in, the result would be the same. So, Chu Xiu had to use the yin and yang origin power. He tried to block and think of a way to get out of this situation. At this time, in the outside world, the 4 demons were gone. Everyone was free to deal with the other demons in underworld sky. They were completely defeated. Even the formation formed by the demonic source energy in netherworld heaven had been destroyed by the heavenly soul. However, they could not do anything about Chu Xiu, who was within it. Soul fights were the most dangerous. Chu Xiu's soul had been dragged into the oblivious sword world. They could not destroy Chu Xiu's soul, could they? At that moment, Fang Qishao, who had been leading the people of Sword King City, suddenly said to Mu Baishuang, "Faction leader Mu, lend me your broken sword." Mu Baishuang frowned, "What do you want?" Fang Qishao said, "Gu Qingqing's sword skills are extremely pure, but the 10,000 Swords Desolate Realm is the real ancestor of sword skills. Their sword skills are also very pure. The broken sword came from the 10,000 Swords Desolate Realm. I can control its power and send it into the oblivious sword world. It can help Brother Chu." "Are you crazy?" Mu Baishuang shouted, "If you were in the 9th heaven, I wouldn't stop you from doing this. But what is your strength now? You just stepped into the martial immortal realm not long ago, and you haven't even stabilized your realm. How dare you interfere at this time? To put it bluntly, you are not qualified to interfere in a fight of this level. Gu Qingqing's sword energy is enough to completely shatter your Yuan Shen." Fang Qishao said with a bitter face, "I know my strength is far from theirs, but do you have to make it sound so real? It's very painful." But then Fang Qishao's expression turned solemn. "Faction leader Mu, you are now the alliance leader of the World Sword Dao Alliance, and you are on Brother Chu's side. You have already offended the Three Pristine Palace when you helped Brother Chu to stop the people from Three Pristine Palace. Brother Chu is now our leader, and he represents our bloodline. Whether it is the Kunlun Devil cult or the forces under Brother Chu's bloodline, we have the common interests. I dare say that if anything happens to Brother Chu, we will all suffer. What happened to the Kunlun Devil cult when Dugu Weiwei left 500 years ago will be what happened to us. So nothing can happen to Brother Chu. We can all die, but Brother Chu can't die. Faction leader Mu, take a good look, who cares about Brother Chu's life other than us? Maybe to them, Brother Chu dying together with these existences from Netherworld Heaven is the best ending." Mu Baishuang looked up, and his heart sank. They should have won this battle. The experts who resurrected from Netherworld Heaven had already destroyed their bodies to perish together with Chu Xiu. The other demons, ghosts and evil spirits that came out of Yellow Springs Heaven were almost all killed by them. Although the martial artists from the upper and lower realms were also injured, the damage was smaller than they had imagined, and it was within their tolerance range. Without the external threat, some people naturally thought more. The Tao Master and the World Master were silent. Obviously, to them, Chu Xiu's life was not important, and even his death was more in line with their interests. Although Meng Xinghe had a promise with Chu Xiu, it was based on the premise that Chu Xiu was alive and could help him resurrect Yi Wei Kong. Now, he was thinking. If Chu Xiu were to die, would he be able to seize the yin and yang source from Heavenly Soul? Other than the Kunlun Devil cult and Chu Xiu's good friends like Fang Qishao, or people related to the Kunlun Devil cult, the others' minds were no longer on the battlefield. Mu Baishuang said in a low voice, "How confident are you?" "To be honest, I'm not trying to sow discord between you and Chu Xiu, but your talent is rare in swordsmanship. Given time, you will be able to reach the 9th heaven of swordsmanship. Now that you have taken the initiative to enter the sword unique domain to help Chu Xiu, if anything happens, Sword King City will be destroyed, and the World Sword Alliance will have no future. You don't have to throw your life away for the sake of others." Fang Qishao shook his head and said, "To be honest, I'm not confident at all, because no one knows how far Brother Chu and Gu Qingqing are fighting. However, I only know that I have a way to increase Brother Chu's chances of winning, but I don't do it. That will tarnish my sword heart, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. The old sect leader always told me to consider the overall situation, but I usually don't bother to think so much. Now that I've considered all this, saving Brother Chu is the overall situation. Why are you guys against it? A swordsman would rather break than bend, but it doesn't mean that he won't back down no matter what happens. It's about maintaining a bright sword heart in the face of difficult choices and difficulties. It's about not being twisted and not going astray. Mu Baishuang looked at Fang Qishao for a while, then sighed. He gave the broken sword to Fang Qishao. When Fang Qishao first joined the World Sword Sect, even sect leader Luo Shan thought Fang Qishao was the future of the World Sword Sect. The Daoist hadn't had a genius swordsman like him in a long time. And now, 7th young Master Fang's performance proved that they weren't wrong about him. In the end, they were still together by chance. Unfortunately, Fang Qishao would not listen to their advice and follow their path. Moreover, if 7th young Master Fang were to cower in fear and try to save his own life, then he wouldn't be the 7th young Master Fang that Luo Shan thought so highly of. Chapter 1465. It didn't matter if Fang Qishao's choice was right or wrong. At least if he thought it was right, then it was right. When Elder Wei, Lu Fengxian, and the others heard this, they even bowed to the 7th young Master Fang at the same time with solemn expressions. They were all members of the Kunlun demon sect. Alive, they belonged to the demon sect. Dead, they belonged to the demon sect. If they could increase Chu Xiu's chances of victory, they were willing to stand out. But in this situation, even if they were willing to step forward, they wouldn't be able to help. That was the saddest part. Fang Qishao quickly said, "No, no, no. Please don't. Old Wei, you're so old, and yet you're still bowing to me. That's too much. Also, can you guys not make the atmosphere so sad? It's like I'm going to die. You have to believe in Brother Chu. If he fights Gu Qingqing to a draw, I'll just be the icing on the cake. He'll be able to guarantee my safety. By the way, Sister May, I've never practiced an Essence Soul secret skill before. I'll need your Red Lotus Hellfire to help me activate my Essence Soul power." At this moment, Mei Qinglian couldn't care less about how 7th young Master Fang addressed her. She immediately unleashed the karmic fire of the Red Lotus and enveloped 7th young Master Fang. But this time, the Red Lotus Hellfire didn't disturb him. Instead, it helped Fang Qishao increase his Essence Soul power to the extreme. The next moment, Fang Qishao's Essence Soul left his body and entered the broken sword in his hand. The broken sword shone brightly, and a pure sword mind shot into the sky. It was even more dazzling than when it was in Mu Baishuang's hand. Although Mu Baishuang was stronger than 7th young Master Fang, it was clear that the sword's recognition of 7th young Master Fang was far greater than Mu Baishuang's. The broken sword had been born in the sword realm, in the beginning of the sword path. To the swordsmen of that era, any random swordsman would be purer than the swordsmen of today. They were truly obsessed with the sword to the extreme, which was why they wanted to separate the sword Dao from the many complicated martial Daos, becoming a martial Dao that was truly comparable to Taoism, Buddhism, and fiendish Daos. These people were the ancestors of the lineage of swordsmanship, the true pioneers of the lineage of swordsmanship. When Fang Qishao fused their powers, he could actually fuse them directly into the selfless sword realm. At this time, in the selfless sword world, Chu Xiu was completely on the defensive. The Yinyang sword qi protected his body, resisting the impact of countless Essence Soul sword qi. In a place where only swords could be used, Chu Xiu couldn't do anything to Gu Qingqing, who had been at the pinnacle of swords for 10,000 years. Even if Chu Xiu used his full power, it would be useless. Although he had reached the peak of the 9th heaven in terms of strength, it did not mean that he could do the same in terms of sword principle. Therefore, the only way Chu Xiu could think of now was to delay. Oblivious sword world could not always exist, and Gu Qingqing's power was limited. Maintaining oblivious sword world cost her more than Chu Xiu. So, in the end, Chu Xiu might win without a fight. Of course, the premise was that he could delay until then. In fact, the current situation was not looking good. Right now, the only method Chu Xiu could use was the sword qi formed from the power of yin and yang. He could only defend passively. But at this time, the Yin-Yang sword qi was getting smaller and smaller. It was only 3 feet away from Chu Xiu's body, and it was being weakened by Gu Qingcheng. If this continued, he would not be far from breaking. Right at this moment, a long sword howl resounded from afar, and 7th young Master Fang entered the selfless sword world with the broken sword in hand. Seeing Fang Qishao appear, Chu Xiu was shocked. "Why are you here?" Chu Xiu thought someone from the outside world would find a way to help him out, but he did not expect that person to be Fang Qishao. After all, Fang Qishao had only just become a martial immortal. It was too dangerous for him to get involved in a fight of that level. Fang Qishao laughed and said, "What? Someone is here to help you, and you don't want to? Brother Chu, I'm very hurt by your attitude." Gu Qingcheng noticed Fang Qishao, too. She waved her hand and sword qi attacked. With Gu Qingcheng's power, if the sword qi hit Fang Qishao, he would have to report to Hades' sky. Chu Xiu moved his hand and the Yin-Yang sword qi roared out. They stopped in front of Fang Qishao and brought his primordial spirit next to him. "Stop talking nonsense. How dare you talk nonsense in a place like this?" Fang Qishao raised the broken sword in his hand and said, "I am really here to help you. You are not good at swordsmanship. You will be at a disadvantage if you fight with Gu Qingcheng here. Pour your power into me. I am confident that I can break the selfless swordsmanship with this broken sword from the 1,000-sword unique field." Fang Qishao was rarely serious, but if he was serious, he would be reliable. Therefore, when Chu Xiu heard him say that, he did not say anything and directly channeled the Yin and Yang origin energy into 7th young Master Fang's essence soul. TSK, the power of the 9th heaven is so cool, although it is only in the primordial spirit. The 7th young Master Fang moaned comfortably, his face full of enjoyment. However, he knew what he was here for. He immediately channeled the power into the broken sword in his hand. In an instant, a sharp light shone. The powerful and pure sword qi was comparable to Gu Qingcheng's. The sword slashed forward, and wherever the sword momentum passed, everything would distort and change. When Fang Qishao first used the karma swordsmanship, it was only to investigate the opponent's karma. Now, it could distort the karma of various powers. Gu Qingcheng's sword qi wanted to stop the power of the broken sword. After Fang Qishao added the karma swordsmanship, the power began to return to its origin. The karma was inverted. It either turned into the purest power and returned to the selfless swordsmanship, or it was completely distorted, entangled with each other, and finally destroyed. Gu Qingcheng used her finger as a sword and gently pointed in front of her. Countless sword qi condensed and finally offset the sword. However, what greeted him next were countless such sword qi. There were not many fancy changes in a fight between swordsmen. There was only the understanding of swordsmanship and the most basic power. Chu Xiu's understanding of swordsmanship was naturally not good, but he had the power. While Fang Qishao did not have the power, he had the understanding of swordsmanship. He also had the broken sword. The combination of the two was enough to suppress Gu Qingcheng. Gu Qingcheng's sword qi could no longer fall near Chu Xiu and Fang Qishao. In the end, even the selfless swordsmanship began to crack, as if it was about to collapse. At that moment, Gu Qingcheng seemed to be holding a sword with both hands. She turned into a sword and slashed at the two. She turned into a sword. At that moment, Gu Qingcheng and the entire selfless swordsmanship were the extremely sharp and powerful sword. Chu Xiu had already integrated the Yin and Yang source power in his primordial spirit into Fang Qishao's body. Fang Qishao also unleashed all his power at that moment. He waved the broken sword in his hand and slashed forward. At that moment, SwordWill exploded and even condensed into a physical body. It was a blurry image of a swordsman. It was not Fang Qishao, but the ancestors of swordsmanship in the sword realm. They had left their images in the broken sword, and in the end, they were triggered by the powerful sword will that Fang Qixiao had unleashed. The two collided, and the endless sword qi danced in the sword realm. All that was left in front of Chu Xiu was a scene of white sword qi intertwining and merging. After some time, the sword qi finally dissipated. Gu Qingqing stood where she was, and her body was covered in cracks. But at that moment, Chu Xiu noticed that Gu Qingqing had changed. Previously, there was only an indifferent look in his eyes. He was simply a puppet without any consciousness. But now, his eyes were as clear as water, and he was even smiling. Chu Xiu wanted to ask him what was going on in Hades' sky and when his life soul would come out, but Gu Qingqing ignored Chu Xiu. She looked at Fang Qixiao and smiled. With a gentle voice, she said, "You are not bad. Very good. It is a blessing for the swordsmanship to have a junior like you. If you can hold on to your swordsmanship, you will reach the top. But at the same time, I hope that when you reach the top, you will not forget and abandon the swordsmanship you have been holding on to." Fang Qixiao nodded excitedly. Although they had been enemies before, Fang Qixiao knew that the one before was not Gu Qingqing. It was just a powerful puppet with Gu Qingqing's strength. Now, the one standing in front of him was Sword Saint Gu Qingqing, who had shocked the world and destroyed cities with one sword. For any swordsman 500 years in the future, seeing Gu Qingqing was like seeing an idol. They were extremely excited. Fang Qixiao was the same. He was not in the mood to smile. At that moment, Gu Qingqing looked at Chu Xiu. She shook her head and said, "You are not Dugu Weiwei, and he is not." Before she could finish her sentence, the entire sword absolute domain instantly shattered. Gu Qingqing's primordial spirit body also dissipated, drifting in the void. Chu Xiu was speechless. Chu Xiu felt very complicated. He wanted to curse, but there was nothing he could do. Half a sentence again. The previous Heaven Master had also left half a sentence, but that was fine. After all, the previous Heaven Master could not control himself. This person had obviously recovered his senses. As long as he did not praise Fang Qixiao, he could finish the story. In the end, in the eyes of this sword saint from 500 years ago, it was clear that 7th young Master Fang, a swordsman of the younger generation, was much more important than Chu Xiu, and much more important than the current situation. At this moment, 7th young Master Fang still had an excited expression on his face as he said to Chu Xiu in high spirits, "Speaking of which, being born in the same era as you and Brother Lu, these perverts, is a very stressful thing. The old sect master always uses you guys to scold me. Can't he use a normal person to compare me?" Did you hear what the Sword Saint said? Sword Saint Gu Qingqing praised me. That is Sword Saint Gu Qingqing. Oh no, why didn't he use the shadow recording stone? By the way, we are spirit bodies now. We can't use the shadow recording stone. Seeing Fang Qixiao's excited look, Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "You can remember this for the rest of your life. Gu Qingqing's words are very precious." You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.